Thank you so much, Yanni. Good evening. It is Tuesday, May 11th, 2021. This is the regular meeting of the Policy and Services Committee. Will the clerk please call roll?
Yes, of course. Chair Koo,
Here.
Councilmember Stone,
Here.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Here.
3 present.
Thank you. And now we go to oral communications. Is there anybody who would like to speak?
Yes, if anyone would like to speak on an item that is not on tonight's agenda, please raise your hand in the Zoom app or press *9. And Chair Koo, we have no speakers at this time.
Super, thank you so much. Now we will go along to our action items. And the first one is update and potential recommendations on pending state and federal legislation. And I welcome our state lobbyists from Townsend. Hello, Mr. DeLuca and Mr.
Mr.
Andres?
Ramirez.
Mr. Ramirez. Andres is the first name, I'm sorry.
No problem.
If I can jump in, Chair Koo, I'll just give a quick overview of information from our federal lobbyist and then open it up for Mr. DeLuca and Mr. Ramirez to provide information about the state legislative efforts, if that's okay. Awesome. Chantel Cotton Gaines, Deputy City Manager. I provided information in the staff report, so I'll just breeze over it pretty quickly. There's a lot going on at the federal level right now, and our federal legislative advocates at Van Scoyoc have been very helpful with keeping us all informed and making sure that Palo Alto is slated to benefit from all the different efforts happening in Washington, D.C. right now. We identified a few just in the staff report that I'll breeze over, and then I'll turn it to Townsend for the state update. So the first is the American Rescue Plan, which everyone has some familiarity with at this point, and provides quite a bit of funding for a lot of different things from the federal government. One of them is direct allocations to communities, and we have factored that into the budget process this year. Our staff have been very closely watching the regulations that are coming forward on that, just to make sure that Palo Alto is in alignment with the expectations from the federal government on those funds. The second piece I wanted to provide a quick update on is the federal earmarks or the community project funding. This is the first year that they have brought those back. Last time Van Scoyoc spoke before this committee, they let us know that it could happen, that it was a possibility. And then when it did happen, it was a very fast turnaround. But we were able as a city to apply through Congresswoman Eshoo for 3 different earmark projects. And we were successful with getting 2 pushed forward through Congresswoman Eshoo's office. And they have a lot more steps to go, so there's no certainty of funding, but this was a huge first step. And we're very grateful to Congresswoman Eshoo for pushing forward our Cahoots-like program recommendation, which is for funding for an alternative mental health services program in partnership with the city of Mountain View and the city of Los Altos. And the second one was for rail grade separation study and the downtown coordinated area plan related to Palo Alto Avenue. So those 2 are the 2 that were pushed forward. Our third earmark that did not get pushed forward by Congresswoman Eshoo was for Fire Station 4 reconstruction. And we are pushing forward that one through our state senator. So we will see if that one gains any traction through that process with Senator Feinstein. So that's on the earmarks. And the last piece is just an update that the census results are out, and there's a link through the staff report on that. So with that, I will turn it over to Nicolo to provide information about a lot of the efforts happening in Sacramento and some of the work that they're doing on behalf of the city and with the city.
Absolutely. Chantal, thank you very much, Chairperson Koo and council members, Nicolo DeLuca, Townsend Public Affairs, and my coworker Andres Ramirez is with me. Quick overview as to where things stand in Sacramento, and then we'll talk about the 6 formal positions the city has taken on legislation. So where we stand right now, there's a big legislative deadline on May 21st. It is the dreaded Appropriations Committee. Both the Assembly and Senate Appropriation Committees meet on May 21st. And the reason why I say dreaded, as some of you know, those committee hearings are almost like it's like an auction. Authors do not present their bills. The chairperson just reads through a list of bills, and they're either held, meaning the bills aren't going forward, or they progress forward. So that's a really big choke point. So it's the 21st Appropriations Committees in both houses. After the 21st, bills then go to the House of Origin floor. So that's the legislative backdrop. April and May have been very, very, very busy with policy committee hearings. A lot of the bills that the city's taken positions on have had 2 policy committee hearings. As you recall from last year, these hearings are could be frustrating at times due to the COVID restrictions. People call in, confusion with technology, confusion on what bills they might be expressing support or opposition to. So the legislative process busy April and May, and now, as I'm sure you've heard, we're now rolling into what's going to be the May revise. So on Friday, the governor will put forward his May revised budget. Unlike years in the past, the governor used today and yesterday to highlight some of his budget proposals. So our kind of rule of thumb is once the May revise comes out, the main focus is the budget. And so the next about 5 weeks, it's going to be quite intense with the budget negotiations and deliberations. Similar to the past 2 years, the Senate and the Assembly are relatively in lockstep as to what their priorities are. Addressing homelessness, small business support, COVID relief, and other items. The governor yesterday announced some of his economic development package about giving money to Californians under certain incomes, and then today was his presentation on homelessness. So again, Friday will be the final unveiling of the May revise. We'll share a summary with the city and then keep you posted as to what's going on, next steps, and where to get involved. There are some opportunities as it relates to funding, such as homeless funding, broadband funding, and other opportunities, which we can get into greater detail if you wish. As it relates to the bills that you all have taken specific positions on, I'm going to let my coworker Andres say a little bit more about it. But I would say 2 of the main bills we're very familiar with. SB 9 Atkins, the city's taken an opposed position that essentially would allow ministerially property owner to split a lot into a single residential family zone, split to do 2 units per lot split. So you've got 1 lot, you split in half, you could do 2 and 2, total of 4. The reason why that's controversial is because it's ministerial, it's by right, and goes past CEQA. The reasons why I say it's familiar is because, as you all recall, last year, this was Senate Bill 1120, which got through both houses, but it ran out of time in order to get to the governor. The second bill is Senate Bill 10 from Senator Wiener, and that allows, if a city approves, that allows a city to pass an ordinance for a parcel to have up to 10 units. Again, that would kind of fast track, you'd get past CEQA. There is some language in SB 10 as it relates to voter approved initiatives. As the bill's written now, it says a city council could overturn a voter approved initiative. And that's got a lot of heat. From various sources that we've talked to, we suspect that that specific part of the bill will be removed in the assembly. But again, as we all know, in Sacramento, until you actually see something happen, you can't guarantee it. So those are 2 of the housing bills, SB 9 and SB 10, that we've been working on. And then I'll actually then talk about Senate Bill 591 from Becker. And then Andres, you could talk about the other bills. So when we were first before you, I think in January, one of the things that we talked about was, let's build a good rapport with our new Senator, Josh Becker. He's been great to work with. So he has a bill that we've supported, which helps build senior affordable housing easier. And it also helps to provide units for TAY, transition to age youth, who currently, when they're on the streets, they don't really have anywhere to go. This bill, I know that the senator has been really pleased that the city is waiting in support. This bill is such a good bill. It has been on consent for the 2 policy committees and on the Senate floor. I've been doing this for 14 years. I have never seen a bill go on consent for 2 policy committee hearings and its own House of Origin floor. So that bill is moving forward, and I know the senator appreciates our support. So with that, Andres can talk about the other bills, and then we're happy to get more forensic on anything else that you all would like to talk about.
Sure, thank you, Nicolo. I'll just go over a couple of the other bills that the city's taken position on at a high level. One of them being Assembly Bill 703. This has to do with open meetings related to the Brown Act. This bill would remove notice requirements particular to teleconferencing and would also be the vehicle to allow continued teleconferencing of public meetings past the state of emergency. There continues to be fleshing out of language and details within the bill, hence why it's been held in policy committee and is going to be a 2-year bill to continue to allow for stakeholder input going forward. But this bill is particularly relevant to local governments as it relates to changes in the Brown Act. Another bill of note, Senate Bill 2 by Senator Bradford. This has to do with peace officers certification and civil rights. It would provide that a threat, intimidation, or coercion under the Tom Bain Civil Rights Act may be inherent. Any interference with civil right would describe intentional acts for these purposes as an act in which the person acted with general intent or conscious objective to engage in particular conduct. So any sort of bad actions on behalf of law enforcement. And the bill would essentially eliminate immunity provisions for peace officers or any custodial officers who do violate those rules within the Tom Bain Civil Rights Act. The next ones, as Nicolo already went over, Senate Bill 9 and Senate Bill 10, so I won't go back over any of those. Another one, and this is one that the city has not yet taken a position on, the city did take a position on this bill, and it's Senate Bill 556 by Senator Dodd, related to streetlight poles, traffic signal poles, and small wireless facility attachments. Essentially, the bill would prohibit a local government or local publicly owned electric utility from unreasonably denying the leasing or licensing of its streetlight poles or traffic signal poles to communication service providers. We did submit our letter of opposition to the author's office, as well as our legislative delegation and committee staff. One item of note is that the bill was amended very recently, and it would now authorize a local government or a local publicly owned electric utility to condition access to their streetlight poles or traffic signal poles on reasonable terms and conditions, including reasons such as aesthetic standards and safety standards, amongst others. So that is one caveat and a recent amendment to be considered. And then another bill, Senate Bill 765 by Senator Stern, having to do with accessory dwelling unit setbacks. The bill would authorize an accessory dwelling unit applicant to submit a request to a city or local agency for an alternative rear or side yard setback requirement if the local agency's setback requirements make the building of the ADU infeasible. This is a bill that's had a lot of stakeholder input. It's going to be a 2-year bill. Senator Stern has agreed to continue working with various stakeholders and others that were involved in some of the ADU laws that were passed in the previous session, but certainly one we'll be keeping our eye on and staying engaged with. And with that, I can toss it back over to Nicolo or Chantal if there's anything I am missing. And otherwise, we're happy to answer any questions that you might have about the bills we listed or any others.
Does my colleagues have any questions? I actually have a lot, but I think, so if you'd like to go first. If not, then, okay, I'm sorry, Councilmember Stone.
Thank you, Chair Koo. And thanks everyone for being here and for that presentation. That was helpful to give a good refresh on where everything is. Yeah, I have several questions. First one, are there any limitations on what we can spend the ARPA funds for? I mean, I understand the purpose of them, but are there limitations set by the federal government on how we use them?
This is one where I know Administrative Services Director Nose is really tracking, but I believe the Treasury Department yesterday or today came out with some additional guidelines on that. And so it's really just a dribs and drabs of information, but as we get it, we are closely tracking it. Nicolo, did you have any specifics that come to mind for you on
You
that
said
one?
it well. Treasury just released it yesterday. I think it was like almost like nearly 200 pages. My eyes still hurt from reading through it. One of the things that stands out that you can't spend it on is your reserves. As you know, our firm primarily works with municipalities, and when we caught that yesterday, you can't backfill any of your reserves because it's primarily for COVID relief, COVID aid, getting people back to work, getting people back on their feet.
Okay, they're really meant to spend anything. Okay, that makes sense.
Exactly. That's a good way of looking at it. They want to spend your cash out the door, spending on things right away.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Next question. Do we know yet? I understand we lost a congressional seat. Do we know yet which congressional districts are going to be impacted by reapportionment?
I don't recall seeing which one. Andres, you recall seeing? I don't know if they've landed on it yet, but I did.
No, I haven't seen which congressional district has been or will be impacted at this point. But as soon as we find out, we can let you know.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. I'm sure all of our Congress members are
Mhm.
very nervous.
They're playing Rochambeau to see who gets to stay.
Yeah, there we go. Can staff can you elaborate a little more on AB 5 AB sorry, where is it? On AB 537. Because it seems similar to SB 556, which we're opposing, and I'm wondering if there's been consideration as well on 537. So if you could just talk about it a little more, and if staff is considering a letter of opposition as well.
Sure. I could jump into that. Chantal and I were speaking about this the past couple of days. 537 it's a wireless telecommunications bill from Assemblymember Quirk. A couple of years ago, you might recall back in 2015, Assemblymember Quirk, who's East Bay, Alameda County, Hayward, he did a bill on a shot clock. So if you were a telecom company and you put in your proposal for a tower, you had a certain amount of time where the city had to respond, otherwise it was by right. So this bill makes some modifications to that on some of your permitting deadlines. Primarily, this is only for telecommunication facilities. When you look at the support and the opposition, a lot of the opposition comes from the American Planning Association, California State Association of Counties, RCRC, Urban Counties of California. So, I mean, I definitely think that this is in line with the city's ledge platform of taking a position of opposed. We've just been kind of focused on some other bills that were front and center, and this is really sort of the next wave. Though, however, I would say, I think it's most wise, and Chantal and I were speaking about this, to wait to see what happens in appropriations. A lot of times bills and appropriations get amended without the author knowing or without their own offices knowing. So I think it makes the most sense. We could draft a letter now, but let's see what happens in appropriations. Let's see if it moves forward or not, and let's see if some amendments are placed onto it. Then that way we can quickly pivot to signing and submitting a formal letter.
And I guess maybe a question for staff follow up on that. What level of council direction or approval is needed for when we're opposing or supporting these legislations?
Very good question. And I'm also going to lean to City Attorney Stump on this as well.
It's a simple majority.
Yes, and for the ones that we have weighed in on, it's been things that clearly align with the legislative guidelines that the City Council adopted in early February, and things that Council have clearly taken a position on before. So it tried as much as we can, obviously knowing that every bill is unique, but just trying to make sure that we're positioning ourselves well in terms of developing those relationships in Sacramento that will make it clear that our voice is going as far as we want it to go in the most productive way, and also aligning with the council legislative guidelines set earlier in the year.
Okay, thank you. A few more questions. What does AB 703 not moving forward mean for the purposes of council meetings when we do return in person? Since now it's going to be, I guess, a 2-year bill. Does that mean our because I know there were talks earlier about us continuing maybe like a hybrid of telecommuting. Does that preclude that possibility now that it's being continued or not?
I'm happy to jump in, Molly, or if you want to chime in too. So keep in mind, so there's been a handful of bills this year, 3 or 4, that relates to online meetings, city council meetings, translation services, et cetera, et cetera. One bill is AB 703. Yes, that is being held. That is a 2-year bill, meaning it will not move this legislative session. There's another bill from Assembly Member Alex Lee, AB 339, which continues to be amended. So a couple things to look at. One is if a bill is signed into law this year, it's not going to go into effect until at least next year, unless it's an urgency bill. And none of these bills about online meetings are urgency bills. There's also the governor's executive order. And then to make things even more confusing, there's a color-coded blue tier, the color-coded system as to when the economy opens up. And so I think we sent out an update last week that a lot of the online meetings and those requirements are still tied to the governor's executive order. Executive order still stands. So we're still in a temporary state of emergency. And he has that executive order, which explains what you can and cannot do. We are aware of some cities are beginning to start going in person or doing the hybrids, and that's based on their own decision, not what's coming out of the Capitol. And so Molly, if you wanted to say more, I'll.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the summary. So as Nico said, the executive order is still in place. And so we're under those rules now. We can anticipate that at some point before the end of the calendar year, that executive order will go away. And that means that the Brown Act without amendments will be the one that applies to our meetings. It does allow telecommuting, but it has some requirements that are currently suspended under the executive order that would come back into effect. And those include, for council members who are participating remotely, we must print the address of where the participation is happening on the agenda. And that location must be open to the public. The public must be allowed to go there and participate in the meeting from that location. Our council also has a local procedure that limits council members, I believe, to 3 times a year of using that procedure. So that could be something that we have control over, that limitation. And as a council, you could decide that you wish to allow unlimited or some other type of amount of time that remote happens. But you will need to do it under the Brown Act rules as they exist.
Okay, thank you. 2 more questions. So if we do get the federal funds allocated for the Kahoot-like program, what would that mean with regards to our advocacy? Because I saw the city, thank you, either today or yesterday, sent out that letter, I believe, regarding the PERT pilot program with the county and our interest in being a part of that. So I mean, are those 2 programs? I mean, like if we get the funding for the Kahoot program, then is the plan to kind of forge ahead with our own model with our partner cities? What does that mean then for the kind of the county program that we've been advocating for?
Thank you. Very good question. So we have been, just as an update in case anyone is less aware, the Santa Clara County is working on a community mobile response program. And based off the presentation that they did to this committee, we followed up and we've been pretty strongly advocating for a North County representation in that program. As you recall, last time it was presented here, they were presenting for 2 locations. One was Gilroy and one was East San Jose. So through our advocacy, they added a North County site to the program design, which has been very great. And Mountain View, Sunnyvale, Santa Clara area is where they are proposing that it goes based off indicators that they have on social vulnerability. But it is the intention that it will serve all of North County. So when we submitted our earmark, which again, I emphasize no certainty of funding, there are so many steps to go. We are excited to be past one huge step. But if we are getting the funds, we presented the proposal as it could allow us to enhance our participation in the county's program to ensure adequate coverage for all of North County, particularly because the location was the Mountain View, Sunnyvale, Santa Clara area. So it will allow us to essentially beef up that program for us locally and or create our own in partnership with the neighboring community. So we didn't leave it, we didn't specify it so much so that it is prescriptive. We wanted to make sure that it will be able to serve the need for Palo Alto. But our goal is not for competitive programs. It's to make sure we serve the population here in Palo Alto with that type of program. And the PERT program also, just because I have the mic, the PERT program is still moving forward. I believe we are making some good headway on that. And that is with the clinician that would be in the vehicle with a sworn officer. So if we are successful with all of these efforts we're pushing forward, we will have a few layers of different types of alternative response models we can provide for mental health services as opposed to law enforcement.
Awesome. And thank you to staff for following up on that and your continued advocacy, and glad to see it where it's showing some success. So I'm excited for that. And one final question. So Palo Alto's zoning in R1 allows for a senior and a junior ADU on all single family lots. So under SB 9, that means that all of the lots in R1 zones would be allowed to have those 2 ADUs on the newly divided lots, correct?
That's a great question. And the 2 and 2, I mean, this has been like debated a lot. In fact, we've had a lot of conversations with the pro temp staff, with other policy committee staff and others. And I know that there's been different interpretations. Our interpretation of SB 9, based on who we've spoken with in the Capitol, various planners and other municipalities that we work with, is you've got one lot, and if you use the SB 9 split, so remember it's ministerial, SB 9 split, you can only do 2 units on one lot, 2 on the other. The pro tem herself even clarified in one of the committee hearings that a junior ADU unit counts as 1, ADU unit counts as 1, a duplex counts as 2. So it's not really, it's depending on how you do it, but it's 2 units on one lot, 2 on the other, if you're using the SB 9 process.
But that would be like by right under the state law. So I mean, you take the state law, but then add on, people wouldn't be able to then add on the city's additional allocation of that additional ADU.
Our interpretation is no, unless you as a city have your own ordinance that you could do it ministerially, getting past CEQA, everything that SB 9 says.
Okay, that makes sense. And so
SB 9 is like the overlay, unless you've got something less prescriptive.
Okay, but then I would imagine, and maybe Molly would weigh on this, then we would have to go back and change that ordinance to if that was the case.
It's my understanding that the ADU, JADU situation in Palo Alto largely conforms to state law and is not a creature of local creation. But as this bill progresses and gets closer to becoming a law, if it does indeed, then we'll be watching the language as it evolves. And any area where Palo Alto's gone further than the state requires, we would be able to, by a simple ordinance, be able to come back to the level of whatever the state is requiring.
Okay, thank you. That makes me feel a little better. All right, those are all my questions. Thank you.
Great questions. Councilmember Tanaka, do you have any?
Thank you for the update. So I just wanted to follow on with what Councilmember Stone was asking about. So I thought I've been hearing a lot of really great feedback from a lot of our constituents about being able to Zoom into our meetings. And so instead of having to attend, 3-4 hour meetings for their 2 minutes apiece, they're able to do that a lot more efficiently. So I think that's really important that we enable that continuation of that, because I've seen a much broader spectrum of people that are able to attend with Zoom versus not being able to attend. So I think that's really important. So I think we want to support that.
Council member, it's, I don't believe there's any aspect of the existing Brown Act that prevents that practice.
Okay, I
So
think we should
that's
continue then.
That's a question for the policy question for the council, and the city manager has placed an item on the council's agenda for you all to talk about that.
Okay.
It also could be a logistical and operational challenge, but you'll talk about that soon at council.
Okay. Anyways, I just wanted to mention that because I think this has been one of the really good things. It's also like, we're trying to reduce our greenhouse gas. So this also helps with that, right? And parking challenges and traffic. So I think we want to kind of all do our part. So in general, I think we want to enable, I kind of felt like we stepped forward in the modern age, and hopefully we don't have to take any steps backwards. So whatever we can do to support that, I think we should to help accelerate the modernization of meetings. The second question I want to ask you guys about is about so there's like this $2.3 trillion infrastructure bill, right? Or not bill, but plan by Biden, right? Can you guys talk more about that and what can happen for our area?
I will also let Nicolo add in, but the piece I'll mention first is it is far from being complete. It is very much so in the early phases of being designed. But my understanding is there are a lot of different pieces that they are being discussing putting in the bill that actually some stretch beyond infrastructure, but are still coming under that umbrella. So Nicolo, did you want to add more specifics on what you're seeing?
I mean, Chantal, I think you said it really well. Whereas respectfully to the president, he will make proposals. I want to do an infrastructure bill. I want to do a green bill. A lot of times it's really up to Congress to decide, yes, move forward, and then what that process is. I think it's clear you all have a great congresswoman and great sign about getting 2 earmarks to go forward. What we're seeing in DC is really kind of what we saw back in 08 and 09, where it's district directed spending, or another way of saying earmarks. And there's definitely a greater propensity to help with district projects. I know each congressperson had up to 10 earmark proposals to put forward, and they're all district related projects. Our advice is when it comes to infrastructure, our recommendation is you really want to highlight your regional support and your regional benefit. So the fact that you all are working with your neighboring cities on a mental health program, I think you're head and shoulders above others. A lot of times when it comes to funding, folks are too parochial or too balkanized. I think when it comes to infrastructure funding, you want to highlight the regional benefit. You definitely want to highlight if you're already in one of MTC's plans. You want to highlight jobs created. That's a really big one. In fact, Andres and I were talking to our coworker Laura, who's in DC today, about that's, it's a flashback to 08, 09. How many jobs are being created? How many people are going back to work because of these projects? Another thing that you really want to do is when you're submitting for an infrastructure project, you want to have your support on the front end. Neighboring cities, counties, MTC, your local COG, any other groups, and to really highlight, why this funding's important. In years past, when we've seen the infrastructure bills, a lot of the bigger projects get the dollars because you're thinking less projects, but higher funding. So kind of what's the benefit? You want to make the decision easy for our 2 senators and your congresswoman to know, hey, this is what's going on, that we're ready. We've already gone through our EIR. We're already cleared with, X, Y, and Z, and this is all the support it has. These are the people that are going back to work. And one last thing, and then I'll stop talking, but I get excited about federal infrastructure funding. You don't want the feds to be the only money in, whether it's the city, whether it's the county, whether it's the state. Feds kind of want to be like the bank towards the end of the closing. Like, who else has contributed? What have you done? They want to make sure what you're doing is real, so they want to make sure that the funding gets spent properly and efficiently.
So I guess my question is, so of that 2.3 trillion, right? Like, I guess the first part is when do we think that this will see the light of day? What's your anticipation?
Oh, that's a great question. I I don't have a date right now. If someone put a knife to my ribs, I couldn't tell you an exact date, but I'll happily go back and we'll talk to Laura, our coworker in DC, to get kind of an estimate. Anders, do you remember? I know we've talked a lot about this. Anders, do you remember if there's any dates pending or what on the infrastructure side?
I haven't heard of any dates pending, but as Nicolo said, it's something we can easily confer with our colleague over in DC at the latest and greatest as to what she's hearing on the Hill.
And how, like there's a lot of infrastructure within our city that we are looking at deferring or not doing, like the Charleston Russell corridor. Like how applicable are some of those infrastructure projects to, getting funding from this, from Biden's $2.2 trillion plan?
Not that familiar with the project you speak of directly. I will say some of the projects that we have seen get traction, and in order to be put in the bill, you need someone to put you in the bill, whether you're a congresswoman or one of the senators. So you need a sponsor. Some of the things that we've seen that are discussed in positive terms would be, say, like a pedestrian bridge over your Caltrain rail or things of that nature. Obviously, you all don't have a port, but ports usually get some funding. Airports can get some funding.
We have an airport.
When it comes to kind of streets and roads, they want to do bigger projects. A lot of times, they'll see if you have maybe a smaller project that has to do with bike lanes or what have you. They're like, well, the locals or your regional group or maybe your state, that's something that they would fund. But they're looking for some of the big ticket items.
Okay. How do they decide between the different? Because probably everyone wants a piece of this, right? So how do they decide like who gets what?
It's a great question. That's a great question. That's a great question. Funding, how far it is along the lines. Is it within the priorities of the person that's going to sign off on it? Is it fair and equitable? We work with Congresswoman Lee, and I know she always looks to try to spread her 10 requests out throughout the district. And she always wants to make sure it's almost a mixture of maybe say half of them are municipalities, the other half are nonprofits with a track record. But a lot of times they really want to have it within the priorities of who the congressperson is. They want to make sure it fits within what they want to do and what their vision is.
And I think the community support is a huge piece of it as well. And we really saw that with this most recent community project funding earmarks process. It was very helpful that we had members of the public submitting letters of support. I think we had maybe 60 to 70 letters of support for each of the projects that we submitted to Congresswoman Eshoo. And in the feedback we received, that really made a difference in making our project stand out over some of the others. So who submitted the letters of support as well as the volume submitted.
But I guess I'm trying to understand. I mean, there's a lot of Congress people, right? So every Congress member is going to throw in what they want for their district. But how does it? I mean, is this spread evenly across all the districts, or is this going to be some districts get more, some get less? How does it work?
Yeah, go ahead, Andres.
No, I was just going to chime in and say it's definitely something that they try to be fair and equitable with. However, certain particular districts or regions have greater need than others as it relates to infrastructure, what have you. But I think it kind of goes back to the points Nicolo made on what's really important to hit on: jobs creation, as Chantal said, community support. And then one thing I would just add into that pot is just trying your best to extrapolate the level of regional significance for any particular project. Because in regional significance, sometimes you'll see an interweaving or an interlocking throughout several congressional districts. So if you have a particular project, even if it's just located in Palo Alto, but it has a particular propensity to affect multiple districts, that's going to be far more competitive and have a better shot at funding, as opposed to something that's also a city-specific project, but also doesn't apply to really anyone else other than those residents in a particular city, if that makes sense.
So what about Caltrain, right? Because we have no way, even with Measure B funding, we have no way of paying for all the different grade separations that we got to do. And I'm sure that's probably the case for most cities. What about money for that to actually pay for all the grade separations?
Well, I mean, grade separation is definitely a good federal project because the price tag is high. To answer your earlier question, the appropriations committees also have a lot of say. And so this earmark process was basically kind of birthed within 2 weeks. and everyone just kind of went out for their call for projects. But there's still a lot of federal regs that you've got to follow. Hypothetically, say you're asking for some type of FEMA related funding, you need a support letter from Cal OES, state Cal OES, because those are the regulations and the guidelines that FEMA follows. So you still have to follow some of the federal guidelines, which at times aren't always clear or always upfront. So just when you talk about how do some people get more projects than others, that's also another example. When it comes to grade separation, I think that's a great federal target, not just for appropriations or the infrastructure package, but also just federal funding. Caltrain is very familiar with the process, but I think that would also be something that you and your neighboring cities would want to support and weigh in on, just because there's such benefit from that.
Are you guys actively advocating for this, or are you guys expecting us as council members to do this? Or how's this supposed to work?
For which ones? For your specific earmarks?
Well, like for instance, let's say we want to advocate funding for Caltrain. How do we do that? Is this something which you guys do as our lobbyists, or I mean,
we're happy to do whatever you all want. We've had a good run with Palo Alto, and our firm has a hard time with saying no. I think that if the Caltrain has a specific ask that's out there, and if it meets within the council priorities, we're happy to spend time and effort and help push that. If it's something that Caltrain's thinking of, we know they're advocates up here in Sacramento. Those are folks we can talk to easily. But I think it really depends specifically on what is it, does it fall in line with the city's priorities? And if it does, and the city team gives us the green light, we're happy to get after it.
Okay. Well, I guess I can't speak for my colleagues here, but I think funding for the Caltrain infrastructure to me would be kind of important, because we don't really have a way of doing that. Even some of the modest ones, right? I mean, I think Measure B funding, we're getting maybe 200 million, maybe $300 million, but each intersection is at least 200 to 300 million, and we have like 4 of them. So how do we pay for all of that? And given our current budget woes, there's no way we're going to have money for that right now. So that's why I'm just trying to figure out, like, can we get money from the proposal? And by the way, why is it 2.3 trillion?
That's a great question. That is a great question. I don't have an answer, but sometimes I do think they're like dartboard. Oh, 2.3. No, just kidding. I think a lot of it has to do with what's palatable, what they can raise, what the debt limit is, et cetera, and what's realistic.
Okay. So what would be the process for us? Would it be like tonight are we expected to like make a motion on this, or what are we supposed to do on this?
I would say related to grade separations and funding related to the infrastructure bill. I think that we have enough council authority, given the legislative guidelines, to have Van Scoyoc as well as Townsend to have those conversations on our behalf at the federal and state level where it's relevant. So I think just kind of, we clearly hear you, and I think we have authority to move on that.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Good questions. And I've heard many times previously at council that there is that interest in seeking funding for Caltrain, the grade separations here. So I would think that, that would be something that would be prudent to do. I wanted to ask, so I'm just debating, because we took so much time, if we should go to public first for for comments, or if I should just continue asking questions. But related to the ones that you reported tonight, I just wanted to find out for Senate Bill 591, which is Senator Becker's. You mentioned that it makes it a lot easier to build these or develop the senior housing as well as the TAY housing. How does it make it easier?
Great question. So I'm going to wonk out here. So I'm going to apologize now if I get too into it. So federal regs allow you, if you're doing senior housing, the federal government allows you to do senior housing with 20% other units. The state of California does not. So if you're building senior housing with others, also known as intergenerational housing, right now in California, you technically have to do 2 different structures. Seniors in one structure, others in another. There's been a lot of studies over the years, back since I think 2003 to present, that for seniors, putting them with younger people, intergenerational housing benefits their health, their mental wellness, same with younger transition age youth. And just so if folks don't know, transition age youth, TAY, is another way of saying foster children. Age group, I think it's like 18 to 25. So, and it's funny that in California, as much as we have such open housing laws and what have you, if you're doing senior housing with another type of unit, you've got to do 2 structures. So SB 591 does common sense, says you can do intergenerational under 1 roof. So that's how it makes it easier. So instead of having to finance 2 buildings, you only have to finance 1. Frankly, I'm blown away that it's 2021 and this hasn't been done yet. That's probably why this bill is sailing through consent in both policy committees and on the floor. But it's a way to, help protect seniors. It's a way to, help foster youth and just really do more intergenerational housing.
That's a great idea. I mean, I think you'll bring us a skip to most of the seniors, and then for the youth, there's the guidance there. So I'm surprised too, but this is a great bill. Then I wanted to find out, so Councilmember Stone already asked my question about 537. On Senate Bill 10, there are other bills that are similar to them where they have a part in it where a council can rule or vote out an initiative by the citizens. So I think that one is AB 1322. I think it would be prudent that if you see another bill or more than one that has these kind of languages in there that is similar to the ones that we oppose, that you call them out, because that's how they do it. I mean, we're all focused on SB 10, but there's these other ones that's just sailing through because there's no eyes on it. So I would really urge you, our lobbyists, to follow and look through those and make sure that that doesn't sail through and that we have opposition letters in on those. The other thing is also with Senate Bill 9, I believe that SB 477 or SB 478 might also have language in there that could potentially do lot splits or add more units onto parcels that are in low density or even single family residential areas. So again, those were just 2 examples, but I would hope for a more in-depth examination of all the other bills, since you're keeping an eye on them, and kind of group them together where they have similar, what is the word? Similar pathways where it's also going to impede on our local control and local governance and even democracy, right? And then on Assembly Bill 703, I do think it is important that, I know that it's not moving forward this session, and that we, even us here at the local level, we need to do community outreach to see how people feel about, and I'm not sure if it's going to go completely virtual or is it going to be half and half. And I hear what Ms. Stump said, that there might be operational hardships and also cost hardships, right? But then also, yeah, so a lot of local community outreach. And before I move forward on other items, I think I should go out to the public and see if there's any oral communications. So I'll stop here. Ms. Kang, will you please see if we have any members
Chair
of the
Koo.
public? Thank you.
If any members of the public would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand on the Zoom app. Or currently we have Ms. Winter Dellenbach. Ms. Dellenbach, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes on the timer.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, I'm not sure of the format here. I actually have questions. Usually you can't answer, but I have a couple questions. If you could just someone answer me. I wanted to know about Skinner, the police reform bill. Skinner, I think, was brought up again this year. Transparency bill about police records. And okay, you're nodding your head. Could you please say something about that? And I'm hoping that the city is supporting that. So you know what I mean. Also, getting back to Bradford a little bit, the decertification of police under certain circumstances of record of misconduct, and also the limited immunity, getting rid of limited immunity. I believe that's the correct way to describe that Bradford bill, a very significant bill. I also, on both of those, want to know that now the managed to stop those. Maybe I'm incorrect about that, but I want to know how your prediction about how both of those are going to be doing towards success. I also have a question, the last thing, about cahoots. I thought somebody said that something about a sworn officer writing with one of a mental health worker associated with cahoots, which is exactly opposite of the whole notion of cahoots, is to have a sworn officer with mental health workers. That's one of the distinguishing things about that distinction, making it different than cahoots. Could you go over that again? Maybe I misunderstood, because sworn officers usually are not associated with the cahoots program. So those are three things. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you. And Chair Koo, we have no other speakers.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. And thank you to Ms. Dallenbach. Would you be able to answer her question? I believe Bradford's bill, Senator Bradford's bill is SB 2, is it?
Yes,
And then
correct.
Senator Skinner's is SB 16?
SB 16, yes. So SB 2, that's the decertification bill, similar to what he had last year, which unfortunately did not move forward. Some of the concerns were about some of that liability based on some of the police officers' actions. I think that bill is going to, I suspect, amendments in the second house, and I don't know what those amendments could really do to the bill. I think of the two, if the city wanted to weigh in, SB 16 Skinner, what that does is it expands the categories of police personnel records that are subject to a Public Records Act. As you may recall, a couple years ago, Senator Skinner did, he might have been SB 1413, number might be off, about access to certain police records as part of the Public Records Act. So this bill adds other categories to it. This bill also was very viable last year. That was one of the bills that ended up not moving forward because the clock literally ran out. And if my memory serves me correct, Senator Skinner took amendments to address concerns from law enforcement and others. And so that bill's moving. That's also going to the Senate Appropriations Committee. But I think if the city were to decide on one or two of the bills, I would recommend SB 16, the Skinner bill.
You would recommend SB 16, the Skinner bill?
Correct.
And would you recommend Bradford's?
You know, I want to see what happens to Bradford's bill. I suspect there'll be amendments. We'd love to check in with the author's office also. I think the decertification makes a lot of sense. I just don't know who's asking for what amendments and what that could look like. Unfortunately, with the Capitol being closed, a lot of what Andres and I and my coworkers do is when we walk the hallways, we got to pick up a lot of great information, share information. So we're a little bit limited on what we could pick up. But before I would recommend anything on Senator Bradford's bill, and I want to make it clear, he's a heck of an author. He's a great senator. I just don't know what is going to be proposed into that bill before I can make a really good recommendation.
So there are good and there are pros and cons in terms of virtual meetings or being able to be there and walking the halls and
Exactly.
finding
Good job
things
tying it
out.
all in together. Absolutely. Well done.
And so Bradford's, Senator Bradford's SB 2 also has in it limited immunity, right? It's not just decertification, there's officers. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
And towards last year, the limited immunity, that I think, cause more discussion and consternation.
I see. Okay. And then, thank you for that. I think the other question that Ms. Dallenbach asked is the Cahoots program, where it did not have, she understood that an officer doesn't ride with a mental health clinician. And I would have thought, Ms. Gaines, that that would be the PERT program, right?
Correct. And I think I was just speaking quickly. And so the programs seemed to be the same thing. So they're not, one program is the PERT program, which is the model where a clinician rides with a sworn officer. And that usually is for some of the 5150 or more, the higher level mental health response situations typically. And then the Cahoots style program is a step down from that, where it is no law enforcement officers involved. And it is a community response, usually with the clinician, an emergency medical person, a response personnel, and then people usually with some sort of lived experience. So people that can more connect one-to-one with the people that are being responded to. So they're two different programs, but the idea is we are working to have both available in our community.
Thank you for that. So I hope that clears up that question. Is there any other questions from my colleagues or comments? No? Okay, then I'm just going to go ahead. You know, I've been looking at a lot of the legislations, as you know, that I tend to do that. And I've come upon some of the ones that I think that we should discuss supporting. And I'm not sure if staff had sent the resolution where the council had voted in order to support retaining local land use and zoning, as well as to preserve our democratic rights. So I was just wondering if there would be a way for Mr. DeLuca and Mr. Ramirez, when you look at all of these legislations, if you can group them to the ones that would impede on our local controls, and those that you believe we should support, and those that we should watch. I noticed with with some of the other cities that Townsend does represent, that there is analysis that is done. And if I may share my screen, Ms. Kang.
Yes.
Okay.
Are you not able to share the screen below?
I think I have to pick do you see anything on the screen?
Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you. So, you know, in my going to different council meetings from different cities, I've noticed that in their packets, they have this from Townsend, which is a memo, and it goes into a summary, and it provides status, what the support and opposition is, and then what is the recommending action. On this particular one, they're saying pending committee. But for example, SB 6, they go through the summary, they give an analysis, who supports and not, and what the bill is all about. Then they, again, give a recommended action. But then they also go ahead and provide a letter so that the mayor can sign it for the city, of course, you know, understanding. But there's that review, there's this analysis that goes through, and I find that very helpful. So I just wanted to explore and see if this is something that can be done by.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I want to give a special shout out to my coworker, Casey Elliott, because he works with Lafayette. He clearly is very, very thorough. We're happy to do that. I am going to respectfully tease him, if you don't mind, to let him know that the city of Palo Alto used his work as the bar So
Oh,
thank you, Councilmember. You now gave us something to tease him about. I say that all in jest. We're happy to do that. Absolutely.
well, there might be another colleague in your office that does it for Cupertino as well, because I've been surfing
There you
Cupertino's
go.
legislative, and
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that there might be another one in your office that might be doing the same thing. So,
No, we're happy to do that. And that's also Casey who interfaces with Cupertino. So you don't know this, but you secretly just made his ego so much bigger. Anyway, no, we're happy to do that by all means. Absolutely.
well, thank you. I mean, I think that would be very helpful for us and for the council members to be able to ascertain, where this bill is and what it's all about, and also your recommendations, right? I don't know what the format is because they have a legislative committee. Both Lafayette as well as Cupertino has a 2-member committee that I believe the consultant goes and speaks to and gives them an update on these. If you can it'll be great if you let us know how they work it.
They meet more frequently.
Okay.
I think they're every 2 weeks, and they meet more frequently. And just from obviously working with Casey over the years, they're also very clear and specific. They pick, a handful of bills and really drill down into those.
Okay, thank you for that. I did want to go into, I was listening to SCAG's General Assembly, and the governor was speaking there last week. And one of the things that he kept on saying was local governments are the lifeblood of this state. And also, he also said, localism is determinative, which is really encouraging to hear, which is why I feel like, I believe we did the right thing. I wanted to go into some of the bills that I would propose that we do support. And I wanted to find out about AB 34 from Maratucci, which is about broadband. And I'm not quite sure if you have notes on that.
I don't, but Andres is actually our broadband expert, so I'm going to cede the microphone to him.
Sure. Yeah. So Assembly Bill 34, currently in the Appropriations Committee in the Assembly. Essentially, the goal of the bill is to put out a bond measure in the amount for $10 billion for local broadband infrastructure financing throughout the state of California. As it's currently written, the language does give a certain apportionment of that $10 billion, if enacted by the voters, to what would be referred to as underserved communities or unconnected communities. So Palo Alto likely would not fall within that category. However, it does not exclude higher resource areas from accessing funding from that $10 billion pool. So essentially, in the provisions of the bill, Palo Alto would still be able to access that money, and it would be how it would be apportioned, at least as it's currently written, is through competitive grant programs. So it's not fully fleshed out as to exactly what that would entail, and there would need to be state of California department oversight into what would go in to those competitive grant applications that a city might submit. But a good amount of it would be, having a laid out plan for local broadband infrastructure, as much as a city does or doesn't have, and kind of incorporating that, and then ideas for what they want to see. And in my conversations with the author's office, which I've had a couple of, they really told me that the goal for them and this bill is to enable local jurisdictions or cities to create a citywide fiber ring. So, city-owned broadband. And then they could either run that program themselves or provide it to their residents at a extremely cheap rate or whatever it may be. But then also, having that opportunity for residents that want to continue to keep their current service providers to do so. But really the goal is allowing cities to build out that broadband infrastructure, so that if certain residents do want to utilize that citywide broadband, that is an option for them. So that's the gist of the bill. I think there's going to be a lot of continued stakeholder input, as this is, proposing quite a large sum of money. But yeah, if the bill continues to move forward, I mean, it's certainly something that I would advise that the city engage in, because it does provide a potential opportunity for Palo Alto to access funds. So that's the short of it, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. So there's a few of these types of broadband bills, like AB 34, there's SB 4, and then there's SB 28 also. And the idea is, most of them is talking, it brings forward that they want to take broadband to rural and needy areas, right? But also I think that, and correct me, that these bills can give smaller towns and underserved urban areas, that was left behind in the tech boom, because it's very costly and it doesn't forward housing in these areas. And since we're looking for telecommuting, telework and remote work, that perhaps, they can attract jobs to those areas. So if our support of it actually brings that equity all around, is that something that would be something to recommend supporting?
My recommendation when it relates to broadband, so keep in mind, we've got a handful of broadband bills and they all have pretty big price tags. We've got the appropriations deadline, which is in 2 weeks, and bills with high price tags traditionally get held. At the same time, we've got a budget surplus and federal money coming to the state on broadband and others. We've been in discussion informally with a handful of offices, leadership, governor's administration, and others to see if there's going to be a play in the budget for broadband funding. When I say play, I mean funding, whether to cities, schools, what have you. I think the city's support would best be, I think the city's effort would best be served by supporting a formal budget action. But before we do that, Andres and I still have a little bit more homework to do to separate fact from fiction when it comes to the different budget efforts. We know very well that Senator Lena Gonzalez and Assemblywoman Aguirre Curry have made a formal request, formal support for broadband funding. So I think it'd be better for the city to support a funding request as opposed to specific bills. But before we do that, I think we should have some informal conversations first and then report back to Ms. Gaines about what the best course of action would be.
Okay, thank you for that. So there's another one that actually rewards city. It's Senator Portantino's SB 15, which was $12.99, and it gives cities grants if they voluntarily rezone idle big box buildings for affordable and workforce housing. And again, I don't know where it is right now, but I think that might be something worth recommending supporting also. Do you have any comments on that?
I could track down where it is. I think that's interesting because it doesn't really fall directly into the adopted ledge platform that we adopted at the beginning of the year. So it sounds like that might be something maybe discussed with the full council, just because I can't see where that fits cleanly into some of our ledge platform items. But I also want to search you. I know I'm pretty sure that bill is going into appropriations. And since the author of the bill is the chair of appropriations, I see it getting out. It's just a matter of how much further is it going to go.
Okay. Ms. Gaines, so with that, does that mean that we have to take it to council?
If there are items that don't clearly fall within the legislative guidelines or just a very obvious previously adopted council action, then it would be better to take that to a recommendation from this committee to the full council.
Okay. So could you take notes?
And we actually put this as an agenda item today where if the committee were interested, you do have the ability to make a recommendation to the council through committee today. Mr.
Okay.
Shikata, I see you unmuted.
As a motion.
As a motion, yes, I'm sorry, I didn't state that part.
Thank you. There's also another one that I was looking at and supporting. It would be AB 787. Any comments?
I am pulling that up right now.
Oh, okay. I guess some of these, if they don't fall within our legislative guidelines, then you would be connecting with Ms. Gaines in order to chat about that, or how will that work?
Yes, that we would
Okay.
talk about next steps, how to handle that. We compliment and the tip of the cap to Ms. Gaines. We communicate frequently.
Okay.
We've got standing check-in calls, a lot of emails, a lot of texts, what have you. And so we talk a lot. And I think if there's some that we're not totally sure where it fits, it's always best to have it go to the full council for everyone to discuss.
Right. So just to clarify, it's not just a conversation between the lobbyist and Ms. Gaines. It's a motion from this committee for the council to agree that the city should take a position and expend resources pursuing an effort.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Dunn. Then there is also AB 1258 by Senator Nguyen. It would be great to know where they are right now. And this is, yeah. The next one is ACA 7 by Senator Muratushi, which is a local control amendment. And then there is also SCA 2 by Senator Allen. I think that is to change the outdated Article 34 of the state constitution, right? That prohibits city and counties from building or buying low rent housing projects. Very strange. Then there is AB 491 by Assemblymember Gonzalez. The next is Assembly Bill 617 by Assemblymember Davis. I'm sorry, I did a lot of homework. There's Assembly Bill 787 by by Assemblymember Gabriel. Ms. Stump, I see you unmuted.
Yes, just sort of want to step back for a minute. So Councilmember Koo, are you going to put this list of new items into a motion and ask your committee colleagues to support a recommendation to council to pursue them? Because I'm just not sure why we're keeping track of things and exactly where we're going with this.
Well, I mean, I think I asked just a few minutes ago that, it'd be great to group in some of those bills that, well, it's not some, it's these bills, this myriad of bills that they keep on coming up with, into whether it fits within our legislative guidelines, and then we can just issue letters without having to go to council, opposition or support. But it sounds like most of these may not fit, or maybe our lobbyists might need to do more research on them to see whether they fit or not. So either we could make a motion in order to have the lobbyists go back and review all of these and put them into the buckets that they belong and bring it back to us so that we can look at them. Or I could go that long route that I was going.
Okay, so just with respect, I guess I would suggest that it's really, the lobbyist is really going to need to it's not really make that decision on their own, more in consultation with the the city manager's office that has to really apply those guidelines. So
Yeah.
I guess that would be an acceptable procedure for you to make a list. And then if supported by this committee, could ask staff to take a quick look at that number of bills and say, oh, some of these are kind of clearly supported by the existing guidelines and that could just move forward versus no, it's a new effort and that would need to go to council. Then they could come back to this committee and this committee could then go to council. City manager, help us out here.
So, yeah, let me just, if I could, give you the perspective that given the volume of bills we're speaking to, I do expect that at least a portion of them will require full council action. And given also that I do think it's a strategic question for the council as to whether essentially taking positions on a large number of bills is part of the strategy, the legislative strategy, and how it fits with the city's legislative strategy. So I would suggest that this appears to be headed toward a full council discussion. And so as such, the committee can decide how to frame the recommendation in a way that allows the council to discuss and determine how to direct our lobbyists. And as the city attorney pointed out, I suspect there is a level of effort involved here that may be beyond our typical legislative activities. And as such, we just need to understand the best way to expend resources in that effort.
Yes, I would really like to find an efficient way of doing this, but with a large number of bills that, unless these senators and assembly members stop bombarding, the legislature and us with all of these bills, we're going to have to pay attention to it and support or not support. And some of these bills are actually really good and can further affordable housing and address some of the equity issues that we're faced with. And then there's some that just does not. So, this is our first effort. I mean, I'm doing all the support bills or recommendation for the support bills. I guess the other way is, the other way that I hesitate to go with is asking our lobbyists, to group them and come back. But then what if there's some that are left out? I mentioned earlier that there is for example, SB 10, but then even if that one gets suspended and put on a 2-year shelf, there's the AB 1322 that's coming in hot behind it, and people are going to miss that. So I think there is some analysis that needs to be taken.
And thank you, Chair. That's really helpful to describe kind of the strategy that you're considering. And again, if I could restate it, it's basically looking at the universe of bills and then identifying how to categorize and then either support or oppose on that basis. I would offer that the alternative, there is at least one alternative strategy here, and our lobbyists should really advise on this, in which help me here in terms of bills introduced versus bills that become law. What is it? 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 or 50? I'm sorry.
Great question. On a average first year of a 2-year cycle, you got about up to 2,800 bills get introduced and around 1,100 to 1,300 get signed. So they get pared down quite
It
substantially.
might be 1 in 3 or less, something. You said
Or
2,800 and 1,300, so either 1 or 2 or 3, something like that. So
Yeah.
that is a decent percentage, actually higher than I expected it to be. But that said, again, and then they cover a whole myriad of issues, some of which we care about because they affect city operations and some that they don't. So I would have to say that from my experience, you would typically not attack every bill, quite frankly, because there's just so much noise that the question of where best to expend the effort would be on those bills that are either objectionable or that we support, that will not move forward without our support. And so that's a much smaller subset of the universe of bills than trying to, again, categorize all of the bills that hit a particular area. So that said, Nicola and Andres, really look to your thoughts on how best to advise the council on effectively influencing the legislative process in the city's interest.
Absolutely. And Mr. City Manager, I think you said it well. When there are some bills that are on the fence, like it's bad, but we know we could work on it and make it better, that takes a lot of time and effort. It is something that we've done before. In years past, there's been some housing bills that at first came out and they were almost offensive, and we worked to help get in language like historic zones are exempt or high fire areas are exempt. So I think it depends on what some of the bills are and what our expectations are. I think at times it's always helpful to do a support letter or two for our delegation. Assemblymember Berman's got some bills we should just support because he's always been good to us and he used to be on the council. Senator Becker's got some bills. It's always good to support because he's a new senator. We want to build out that relationship. We also feel as a firm, it's also strategic. Don't jump down my throat on this, but there's some authors whose bills we oppose a lot. Senator Wiener might be one of them. There might also be some bills that he has that are innocuous to us that make sense to support just because we're trying to build out relationships and we want to look at the end game, the long-term game. I think, and then just like what the city manager said, I think then there's some bills that can use a little extra oomph. It's helpful to have cities on board. It's helpful to have cities such as Palo Alto on board. And then there's, I mean, Anders and I watch so many bills that we don't always talk about in some of these committees. And sometimes you either, let others kind of handle the dirty work or you help chime in. So I think it depends, but I really think it's smart to have a universe of no more than 20 bills that we're actively working on, which includes support and oppose. I also think it's very helpful to have discussions on, are we supporting this because someone asked us? Are we opposing this just because others are doing it but doesn't have an impact on us? Because it also helps with time management, levels of effort, and things of that nature.
Thank you for that. When I watch Lafayette's meetings and also Cupertino's meetings, they're getting a lot more information than we are. And I understand that, to keep it efficient, just to support about 20 or however many you describe. But with the huge amount that is there, it's just worrisome when something flies through. I mean, SB 35, SB 330, SB 1333, even SB 827, which is messing up our entire methodology for RENA. I mean, that's really concerning when these things sail through, So I just feel that, there's more information coming through when I'm watching the Lafayette meeting, and over here is just what you provide or what I find, and then I submit to Ms. Gaines, and then she takes a look at it. But I can't keep submitting it that way, So there has to be a better way of bringing light on the topic and analyzing these things. So the first one is, analyzing it, as you say, Mr. Casey does with the other cities, but also perhaps at this point, I would say that I would make the motion that we'll have Mr. DeLuca and Mr. Ramirez or Townsend group these bills which fits within our legislative guidelines with the knowledge of our resolution, which preserves local control and democracy, and those that would need council oversight.
So, Chair, I do think, you're onto something that maybe has a larger impact, which has to do with the process that we use for taking positions on bills. And so whether it's Lafayette or Cupertino or another city has a model that you'd like, then that may be a part of what the recommendation could be from the committee to the full council. If it is potentially a delegation of the ability to send letters of support or opposition, or some other streamlined way to, as you say, one, do the analysis. And I know Townsend, and quite frankly, the Legislative Analyst's Office does analyses on all these bills in ways that may be responsive to the type of analysis that you'd like to see. And then it's really a council question at that point, how the council wants to weigh in and influence the outcome. You know, letters quite frankly are one tool, and probably more a larger tool during COVID than they are during normal legislative sessions. But ultimately, walking the halls and showing up is going to be part of the strategy going forward once we get back to the next normal.
I also do want to add in, when I said 20 bills, I don't mean just like we just watched 20 bills. I mean like actively involved. And that was just, you know, a round number to help paint a picture. Like the city manager said, you know, if there's bills to do letters on, we can do that. I just think we just need to be focused and just really want to make sure we're managing everyone's, you know, expectations and efforts on specifically what we'd be working on.
I appreciate your suggestion, and thank you, Mr. DeLuca. I appreciate your suggestion. And if the model, well, I guess I have a motion out there, and I'm going to ask Mr. Shikata for your guidance if I should add that as another option to, you know, item B, C, I think maybe, that there are models in other cities that perhaps the council can review and decide if those are models that we want to follow.
Sure, I mean, that's certainly an option. And again, this may not work in you know, the context of Palo Alto and the Palo Alto City Council, but as you know, for example, the Cities Association uses a legislative committee, and they've delegated the ability to take action to committees. And I think some other councils do that as well. But in any case, something for you and your colleagues to consider. What's the best way to get this type of work accomplished?
Okay. So Ms. Kang, C would be to direct staff to provide.
Well, I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt, but I'm actually suggesting
want to
a
divert.
council conversation rather than a staff follow-up. I think it might be useful even for the PNS committee to discuss if having some different model other than, again, the version we use, which is if it fits with the guidelines, we can take positions. If it doesn't fit, it goes to the council. Is there some other way of operating that the council would like to consider?
And so are you suggesting that we discuss in PNS, or we discuss with council, with the whole council?
Well, ultimately, it would be a council decision, but the PNS committee, if you're inclined to recommend that, could make that recommendation.
Yeah. Okay, PNS recommends to council to look at other city models that would contain a legislative committee and more oversight of proposed legislation. Such as those in Lafayette and Cupertino. Thank you. And then on A, it's not SEA2, it's SB2.
And Chair Ku, if I may, for A, is it relaying support or is it just a position? I wasn't clear if all of those were.
Those are support.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, since nobody has second yet, I was just going to say, if I may amend my motion, since our lobbyists and staff is going to group the bills into what fits into our legislative guidelines and those that might need to go to council, perhaps A is not needed. We just let the lobbyists group those bills. Does that work, Mr. DeLuca and Mr. Ramirez?
That's what works for the committee, absolutely.
Clarification on what the bills you mean.
The proposed legislative bills, legislative, which fits within, is ours sufficient or should we say Palo Alto's?
Chair, just for clarification, are you referring to housing bills specifically or all bills?
All bills. I think there are some things that we have said in a lot of our meetings that mental health is important, policing is important, transportation, housing, and we also have our resolution where we have retaining and preserving local controls and governance. So as long as they fall within those, I think our lobbyists should look at it.
So I'll let Townsend speak for Townsend, but this is a significant amount of work that would be involved here to actually evaluate all introduced bills. And so if this can be accomplished within our existing funding for your contract, great. If not, I think we'll need you to speak up.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. City Manager. I think what makes the most sense, and we do know the policies, housing, transportation, public safety, the environment, mental health. Those are pretty vast. What makes the most sense, keeping those buckets there, would be we start this list after the Appropriations Committee. That's going to be where a lot of the bottlenecking is going to occur. There'll be reduction of bills. And respectfully, I don't see a position the city is going to take right now on bills that are in the Appropriations Committee that are going to put them in one spot or another. So I think what makes the most sense is we do the buckets. We could have it listed in the different policy topic and list what the bills are, a brief summary. You've seen those reports that we've done, but it makes the most sense to do it. We could start putting it together, but it'd be finalized around the end of May, which would be after the appropriations deadline.
And I leave that to you. I mean, you know how the Sacramento works. So when would be the right time to do it? I think that's a good suggestion.
We had the list by the end of May. And then once we have the list, defer to what the committee and the council wants to do on those bills.
Okay. So do we need to change anything in those in the motion, or that's understood?
I think we understand our homework assignment.
Yeah, and is the idea that this is returning to Policy and Services Committee, just to be clear?
Well, this is direction that needs to come from the council in terms of the approach to be taken on legislative matters. I believe the intent was also not only to address those that fall within local control, but also others, so that it's the others that maybe that last phrase was intended to require city council action. in order to take a position.
And can I wordsmith a little bit? Also, I think the attention is the legislative guidelines as well as the local control resolution, but those aren't one-to-one because the guidelines are more far-reaching than the local control resolution. If that's okay with you, Chair Koo.
Yes. Okay, so can I get a second? Or amendments?
Can I ask a couple clarifying questions before seconding?
Yes.
Thank you. So I don't think I didn't hear a clear answer from Townsend regarding would they anticipate us needing to amend whatever contract we have in order to be able to fulfill the work in A?
Don't worry about that. I appreciate that existing contract stands. We appreciate that though. Thank you I do appreciate that consideration though. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thanks. And then for B, I know the city manager kind of mentioned maybe that coming back to PNS before going to council. And it seems like, and it's an area where I would like to definitely dive a little deeper into and understand that process a little more. And so, city manager, was that the suggestion that you were making with B, that it should come back to PNS, or do you think it's appropriate for that to go directly to council?
To be honest, I was actually suggesting you talk about it tonight, and if whether that was something that you wanted to consider further based upon the this overall strategy for how to take legislative positions, being a bit different from, well, quite frankly, being significantly different from our current practice.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I have. I don't think I have enough information in front of me, nor was I really prepared to kind of talk about the process that we typically use to be able to have a robust enough conversation on that at this time. So I don't know. I feel like I'd be more comfortable with that, with kind of that idea coming back to PNS to be able to have an opportunity to really look into what City of Lafayette and Cupertino's doing. I know the chair shared the screen with us, but that was
Yeah, that was just
that was helpful. But yeah, I would like to be able to kind of have more time to review these things before. So I'm wondering, would the chair be open to amending B to bring that back to PNS before council?
Sure. So would you like to provide the amendment, or so B would say return to PNS for committee to look at other city models? Thank you, Danny.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll second.
I'm sorry, not to be difficult, but I'm a little lost with what's going on in B. Some work is being done by staff and coming back to policy and services.
Well, actually, it would be just for to look at the models in City of Lafayette and Cupertino, and perhaps if there are other models that we should look at. I mean, a question to Mr. DeLuca. So your company works with many different cities. What are some of the models that, I mean, obviously Cupertino and Lafayette has quite they do have a similar model. And that's one, or is it two? Is there other models out there that your company has?
Yes, there are. And whereas our firm primarily represents municipalities, I'm not always comfortable putting out what we do for all of them, you know, without some kind of discussions with them. It's really, I think the fundamental issue is how involved do you want to be? And when I say you, I mean the city of Palo Alto. For some cities we work with, we do bi-weekly check-ins and go over specific bills. For some cities we work with, we do a general, hey, this is what's going on. How do you want to get engaged? What are your thoughts? What do you want to work on? For some cities we work with, they sponsor legislation. They specifically sponsor a bill and they help draft it. They help present at committee hearings. It's the gamut. Others, it's a mixture of briefings with the city manager and his or her office, presentations to the legislative committee or the full council. So I think the fundamental question is how involved do you, when I say you, I mean general, the city of Palo Alto, want to be? Do you want to be at the table on a lot of these policy topics? If so, then let's talk about that because that's a different strategy.
So
Do you want to take, so go ahead.
sorry, I thought you were finished. Go ahead, finish up.
No, I was saying that if you want to be involved or respond in similar fashions as to what other cities do, it's all about clear communication on what the end goal is, and making sure we know what the end goal is probably then the best way to frame what the legislative committee does or what the legislative framework looks like.
So Councilmember Koo, I don't mean to be obstructive in any way, but there is a process issue here. There's actually two of them that I need to highlight. One is that this item is agendized as a legislative update with the potential for this committee to recommend some items to council to go ahead and take a position on. So I don't think anybody on staff was aware that we would turn in this direction of potentially looking at changing the model by which Palo Alto engages with state, maybe federal government. So we're not agendized for that. The other process issue is that we try to be careful that committees don't generate substantial work assignments to staff at the committee level, rather that council refers something to committee and then council has sort of authorized then staff to do the work to support that discussion in committee. And this is a little bit backwards. So I think that this is potentially, actually both A and B are very, very large staff assignments to survey the universe of bills and sort of do some categorizing. That's a very big assignment. And then it's also a big assignment to do survey work and look at models and to propose something. So unless the city manager feels differently, I feel like just for clean process, you really should make a recommendation to council, that council direct the committee to take up these items. And then you can work with staff. If council gives that authority, you work with staff then to do that.
Let's see, I would agree. The motion does, at its top line, say these are recommendations from the committee to the council to approve these actions. And so presumably, and again, I'm also mindful, but not totally, let's say, able to define where the Brown Act issue might be and the way this is agendized. But in any case, I would, correct me if I'm wrong, but this entire motion would need to go to the council for its approval and then lead to some subsequent work. That the categorization described would not really happen until council approves that as the strategy for how to engage on, quite frankly, the universe of bills.
And I apologize if that's what everybody was intending. I might have misunderstood an exchange between Councilmember Stone and Chair Koo, where I thought that there was some understanding that maybe this was going to come directly back to committee first. And if that was not what was intended, I apologize.
Definitely A is going to be what Mr. DeLuca has said. They're going to be looking and to bucket all the bills. not all the bills, the legislative bills. Um, and it's going to come back so that council can take a position on it. So I think that would fit. And the other one is just coming back to policy and services.
And so then at the risk of making a bit of a fine point here, as I read the motion, the action, should this motion be approved, will be the PNS committee is making this recommendation to the full council. Then the full council needs to approve this motion or this recommendation before Townsend actually does the categorization and comparison of the bills to the legislative guidelines, and basically creates a matrix of for each bill. How does it, what does it do, and how does it fit with the legislative guideline? And does the council want to take a position on those that don't fit, or actually on all of them?
So going into details.
Well, and again, it's been said, but I do want to impress upon the committee, this is a major work effort. And quite frankly, in some ways, it is what the legislative analysts, the state's
So
legislative analyst does.
I appreciate that. The legislative analyst does that. However, we have Townsend, and the legislative analysts, what the analysis that they do is not coming to policy and services or to council. And so we have to go out and find out ourselves. That's the problem that seems to, you know, we arrive at knowing what issues we're faced with a little bit too late. And that's where I'm getting at. And so, I mean, if the legislative analysis is brought to us, then we can take a look at it. But at this point, we're working in the dark most of the time. And that's the problem. And we have Townsend. So why is it that we're not utilizing Townsend to look at all these things for us? And they've already said that it works within the contract that we have with them. And I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. DeLuca.
Right. I think that the big distinction is that as Mr. DeLuca pointed out, ultimately the question is, what action does the council want to take with respect to every bill, or to each bill? If the response to that is to send letters of either support or opposition, then that's somewhat somewhat of formality, and perhaps that can be done at a high volume. What Mr. DeLuca pointed out, though, is that in addition to the support opposition decision, there can also be decisions that are based on a desire to build relationships with the legislators, and quite frankly, a recognition that most of the bills won't make it out of the legislature anyway. So how much focus, time, and effort does the city want to spend on bills that are, for a variety of reasons, not going to go anywhere? So I think that's the interpretive piece, and perhaps we're struggling a bit with how to decide on that interpretive piece, and then the action that the council instructs our lobbyists to take.
And I look for Mr. DeLuca to give us that interpretive piece, because he works there and he knows when the bills are not going to go any further. Like, for example, he suggested that it goes to appropriations, and then a lot of them get dropped, and then they can decide from there what are some of the bills that they might want to suggest analysis on.
And action. And again, that action could be a letter, or it could be a visit to a legislator's office, or it could be seeking amendments, which may be more likely. And let me be blunt here. I think if we were to take positions on 2,800 bills it would solidify Palo Alto's reputation one way or another. And again, not to describe what it would be, but we would become known as a city that pumps letters, support or opposition, based on the analysis, as opposed to being more selective to influence the outcome of the legislation. And so I think that's the extreme examples of how um, how to use this process in a way that serves the city's interests.
How does Townsend, and that's where the exploration needs to take place also, is obviously City of Lafayette and Cupertino are not looking at every single bill. I would think that Mr. DeLuca would know, and Mr. Ramirez would know our city well enough to know what are some of the bills that will affect us, and some of the bills that we should be, that has impacts, or that good and bad. So a lot of this is looking towards Townsend to provide that.
And
I
if
agree, we can't look at every single bill, the over insane number of it. I'm sorry, Ms. Gaines.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you. I was going to just offer that the way that we've used the legislative guidelines historically is to narrow that pool of bills of the 2,800. So the work that Townsend does as a starting place is to take the 2,800 bills and see which ones really seem to fit in the categories that are of importance to Palo Alto. And then amongst those narrowed bills, it's trying to figure out how to best strategically position the city, which doesn't always mean a letter or like an officially written something related to the bill. Sometimes it's a conversation. Sometimes it's just following the bill to see if it makes it through, or what are some of the amendments or conversations that happen related to all of those bills. So it's a lot of gray space, unfortunately, which I know is some of what we're trying to solidify today. But because it's relationship based, a lot of it that Townsend is able to do for us, that's kind of the core of how we've used those guidelines to narrow that scope of work, because all the 2,800 bills won't make it, maybe even half won't. And of those that do, not all of them impact Palo Alto in a reasonable way to use our resources towards them. So I think that's where the question on the analysis needed on bills is really analysis needed on which bills is the core question, as opposed to more broadly. Nicolo, I cut you off. I think you were going to offer something.
No, Chantal, I think you and Ed both said it really well. I think the fundamental question is, what do we want to do? What do we want to be? I also confidently don't feel that we've missed any bills this session. There's some bills that we could take a position of oppose or support, but I feel confident that we haven't missed anything. I also, just like what the city manager said, if there's certain things that we want to do and how to position ourselves, there's a lot of work on the front end. And if we are talking about other cities, there was the Tri-Valley cities that we work with. They hired us about 4 years ago because they wanted to have a state focus. We had a clear understanding of it's going to take a while to be recognized as someone that wants to participate in the state process. When I say participate in the state process, just to be clear, our definition is getting involved with legislation. Having committee staffers call us to say, hey, we're working on a bill, would love to get Palo Alto's input. Or hey, do you guys have any amendments you might want to suggest? So happy to do the buckets, happy to, as Chantal said, do an analysis of certain bills in those buckets. But I also do want to flag, if there's things we want to work on, like amendments, then that takes up a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of thought. So for example, housing bills, in years past, your housing director was very helpful when we came up with certain amendments that we suggested, whether for SB 50 or SB 827. But as much as, we're used to it, this is what Andres and I do all the time. At times, we're going to need to bring in some of your department heads, because we're not going to know the exact input on Palo Alto, like your police chief might, like your fire chief might, or like your public works director might.
So the motion is there. I mean, does it need more fine tuning? I mean, I think we get the gist of what we're asking for based on what Mr. DeLuca and Ms. Gaines just said, and the city manager.
I think there's some bills, if you want, we can get more forensic. But I personally think that the process that the city's had over the years has been helpful.
So when you say that, you're saying just let it go and go the route of not bringing it to council, not bringing it forward until the very last session.
No,
Because really,
I'd say respectfully what the committee wants to do, sending to council, I don't have a input on that. That's up to the committee's discretion.
You know what, in that case, let's just vote on this. If there's no more comments.
Councilmember Tanaka has his hand up.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Tanaka.
Great. Question for DeLuca. I wasn't clear on your answer. So are you going to charge us more for this or not?
No,
Because-
no.
Okay, so this is you can do this work without any additional cost to the city. Is that right?
We are not going to change the terms of our scope or of our contract.
Okay. And we're not going to get charged more?
Correct, you're not.
Okay. Okay, that's all I really want to know.
Okay, so shall we vote? Ms. Kang?
Yes. Chair Ku,
Yes.
Councilmember Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Yes.
This motion passed unanimously.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go to, thank you, Mr. DeLuca and Mr. Ramirez for being here and helping us through this.
Thank you, everyone.
Pleasure.
Good night. We're going to go to item number 2, which is review and recommend to City Council adoption of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, transition plan update for city buildings, parking facilities, parks, and public right-of-way, sidewalks, and curb ramps. Oh, thank you. Mr. Eggleston?
Okay, good evening, Chair Ku and committee members. Brad Eggleston, Director of Public Works. The city's ADA transition plan is an important roadmap for making sure that city facilities and services are available to people with disabilities. And a lot of effort over multiple years has gone into this transition plan update, and we're happy to bring it here to you tonight. Just wanted to note that earlier today, this morning, we reviewed the general fund capital budget with the Finance Committee, and I wanted to point out the linkage between our goals in addressing the items that are identified in the ADA transition plan update and the capital budget we just reviewed, where we budget approximately $500,000 annually for work on accessibility issues. So we're looking forward to reviewing this with you and also to council's approval of the plan, and with the capital funding also in place to begin making progress on the issues that have been identified. And for the presentation itself, I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Director of Public Works, Holly Boyd, and Acting Senior Engineer, Valerie Tam. And just note that Valerie Tam has been the project manager for this since this work began. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Director Eggleston. Good evening, Council and Chair Ku. As Brad said, my name is Holly Boyd. I'm the Assistant Director for Public Works. I am joined here with Valerie Tam, Acting Senior Engineer, as well as George Hoyt, Chief Building Official in Planning and Development Services. So we're here tonight to discuss the ADA Transition Plan update. I wanted to start with some background information. In 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as ADA, was passed. The act provides civil rights protections to persons with disabilities in areas of employment, state and local government services, transportation, telecommunications, and access to public accommodations. The city's existing ADA transition plan complies with federal regulations issued in 1991. And in 1993, the city established an annual CIP project to fund improvements identified in that plan. Over the last few decades, there's been a lot of changes. the city has made progress on improvements identified in the 1992 plan. However, since then, the ADA standards were updated in 2010, and the city has acquired new buildings and maintenance responsibilities to existing buildings have changed. So this led to the 1992 ADA transition plan being out of date and a new plan was required. In 2015, the city hired SZS Consulting Group to update the existing ADA transition plan and evaluate the progress since the existing 1992 plan was approved. So tonight, staff is requesting the Policy and Services Committee recommend adoption of the ADA transition plan update to council. So the ADA covers a wide range of topics and not just physical barriers and facilities as listed here in the slide. The 2010 ADA standards Title II, Public Entities Subtitle A, focuses on protecting qualified individuals with disabilities from discrimination on the basis of disability in programs, services, and activities provided by state and local governments. So under the requirements of Title II, public entities like us are required to develop an ADA transition plan. So there are the ADA transition plan includes 4 elements or requirements. First is the identification of physical obstacles that limit accessibilities of city programs, service, and activities. Second, we need to describe what method or methods will be used to make the facilities accessible. These 2 requirements are addressed in the facility reports provided in the transition plan update, and we'll talk about more about that later in the presentation. And then third, a schedule needs to be included that outlines how the city will achieve compliance. Lastly, we must indicate the official responsible for the implementation of the plan or overseeing remediation of these identified barriers. The official responsible is currently identified as our city's chief building official. Since this plan is a large undertaking, he is currently supported by other designated city staff, such as Public Works, in improving the city's overall accessibility. So I wanted to talk a little about the plan's objectives. The city has prioritized access at each facility based on use. So our first priority is to provide accessible points of arrival. This includes connections to the building from sidewalks surrounding the facility. Next, providing access to the building and making sure entrance doors, lobbies, and corridors are ADA compliant. Once a user is able to access inside the building, ensuring that primary function areas such as meeting rooms, offices, and restroom facilities are accessible. And then finally, making sure the building elements are accessible, such as lighting controls, desks, and signage. So next we'll discuss the ADA transition plan process. First, this is for the public right-of-way. The public right-of-way is a network of streets and sidewalks creating public pedestrian access within a public entity's jurisdictional limits. The city has taken the approach to identify all sidewalks and curb ramps in the city's right-of-way as deficient. The city has recently completed the 30-year sidewalk district cycle, and this streamlines the creation of the schedule for the future work. In addition to the annual sidewalk maintenance program, the city handles requests on a case-by-case basis. ADA ramps are also brought into compliance during any street resurfacing and development projects. So this is an example of the schedule for the sidewalks. The public right-of-way schedule starts in 2023 and is aligned with the 30-year sidewalk annual maintenance program. The schedule was formed based on the cost of and age of curb ramps and sidewalks. So now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Valerie Tam, and she is our acting senior engineer in Public Works.
Thanks, Holly, and good evening, council members and Chair Koo. As Holly mentioned, I oversaw the ADA transition plan update process for the city's facilities. So for buildings, these 4 priorities as seen here are used to assess city facilities. So first, pedestrian access to building entrances. Next, access within the building to primary building functions like conference rooms. Sanitary facilities and building elements within spaces for programs, services, or activities by the city. And lastly, barriers with low severity effects, such as signage. Next slide, please. So the top right corner shows what a facility survey report looks like. Facility survey reports identify barriers in all of the physical elements that affect the accessibility of primary building functions for programs, services, and activities within each public facility. So this means that staff-only spaces were not evaluated during this process. As described in the transition plan requirements, each report gives a description of the barrier and a proposed solution. Next slide, please. So when compiling the transition plan schedule, many factors were considered, as you can see on this slide. The age of a facility, cost of remediation, and long-term facility planning were heavily weighted factors in prioritization of these facilities. Next slide, please. So here, only a portion of the schedule is presented, but the transition plan schedule for public facilities includes all facilities that were evaluated by our consultant, as well as new construction projects that were not evaluated due to planned CIPs. The schedule is divided into 3 implementation phases and spans 60 years. Each facility was assigned a remediation duration ranging from 5 years to 20 years based on the facility type. So for example, parking facilities generally were given 5 years and buildings were given 20. Parks and open spaces varied from 10 to 15 years, depending on the cost estimate for remediation provided by our consultant. Next slide, please. Another requirement of the ADA transition plan process was including public outreach. So the city's public outreach included the following. To kick off the public outreach process, we held 3 community meetings with our consultant, which were done in May of 2019. They were advertised on the city's website and through the Daily Post. These meetings were also advertised to organizations that operate or support individuals with disabilities in Palo Alto and surrounding areas. A questionnaire was made available online, as well as paper copies that could be dropped off at Mitchell Park Community Center, Rinconada Library, City Hall, and College Terrace Library. The city's public comment and feedback period was a total of 45 days. The questionnaire was also translated to Chinese per request made. The city wanted feedback on the top 5 accessed facilities, a user's method of access and what neighborhoods they frequented, comments on accessed facilities, and whether the user was a resident, commuter, employee, or visitor. So from the questionnaire responses, some of the most accessed facilities in Palo Alto included Coverly Community Center, Mitchell Park Library, Mitchell Park Community Center, and Lucy Stern Community Center. Next slide, please. So to ensure compliance, staff must ensure that we are tracking the city's progress on remediation. So this serves as documentation in cases of litigation. Currently, the city has designees in Public Works, the Building Department, IT, the City Manager's Office, and the City Clerk's Office that provide progress documentation to Public Works Engineering or reaches out to us when planning work that could include items identified in the facility report. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, staff recommends that this committee recommends adoption of the ADA transition plan to council. Thank you.
Thank you for the report and the presentation. I'll go to public comments first. Ms. Kang, could you see if we have any public who would like to speak? Thank you.
Yes, of course. If anyone from the public would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand on the Zoom app or press *9. Chair Koo, we have no speakers.
Very good. Does my colleagues have any questions or comments? Oops. Councilmember Stone.
Thank you, Chair Koo, and thanks to the staff. I mean, I was just reading through this report. So tedious, and I just felt really bad for whomever had to take this on, because that's just so much work and really impressive analysis. And so thank you for all your time and putting together the report and presenting to us tonight. Such an important task for the city to undertake. So really grateful for that. I have a few questions. First one's probably for Molly. What liability is the city under for accidents that might occur due to poorly maintained sidewalks especially now, especially given the city is clearly on notice of the various hazards within our district by district kind of sidewalk inventory. Talk about that a little bit.
Right, yes. So there is a set of doctrine around when a city can be liable for a dangerous condition of public property. And we do at any one time have a small handful of claims or lawsuits that involve someone who may have tripped or fallen on a sidewalk that has a lift to it, or a crack, or is damaged in some way, or has perhaps tripped over some other facility. Utility covers are an area where people do from time to time get injured. And we are often able to defend ourselves based on various immunities and protections that we have. But in many other cases, we do provide compensation to make people whole who are injured on our facilities. So there's a case-by-case evaluation of each of these claims under the settled law.
And
Okay.
I just wanted to jump in here to clarify. This assessment as part of the ADA transition plan did not look at every piece of sidewalk in the city. We actually did a separate sidewalk assessment study once we, in 2018, once we finished the 30-year cycle, and we assessed about 20% of the sidewalks in the city and identified repairs, and we made those repairs that were of concern in 2019 in our contract, our annual sidewalk repair contract. So I just want to let you know that this doesn't actually point out areas in the city with, sidewalks that need repairs.
Good to know. Thank you. And Molly, I think you'll appreciate this. In law school, in my tort class, my tort professor was a resident of Palo Alto, and her actual hypothetical for our final was a cracked sidewalk in the city that the person fell on and injured. And it was, I was able to recognize it immediately and go, okay, it's a Palo Alto resident. I appreciate this final.
And I'm sure that, well, and every city, by the way, has issues because
Oh, I'm sure.
Sidewalks have vegetation and people drive over them and things happen. So our city is no different. And I'm sure your law school exam had comparative fault defense, right?
Yeah.
A question about whether the defect was significant enough to cause liability, et cetera.
Yep. All the fun issue spotting. Okay. It's nice to be back on legal issues, unlike last night where we went into all that tech stuff at the end. That was
I couldn't agree with you more. Yes. Thank
Good.
goodness.
Yeah, that was rough. But I know the mayor was enjoying it. Okay, sorry. My next question: are there any federal funds provided to be able to remediate accessibility issues? Since this is federal law, is there any funding to be able to support the city's efforts on these things?
So I can answer that. I am not aware of any specific grants. It may be something we can look into, as pulling a number of these to pull a larger project together. I'm actually going to defer to Valerie or George to see if they know of any specific federal grant funding for this.
Yes, good evening, council members and Chairman Koo. I'm not aware of any grant programs that are available from the federal government to make accessibility improvements. So if there were some, I'm sure we would look into them and exercise them as appropriate. And if some come up, we will do that same thing.
Okay, thank you. And yes, yeah, that'd be great if we can look into that more. One thing I was confused about, it kept talking about website accessibility in the report, and I wasn't clear about what ADA issues are associated with the website not being accessible. I understand physical accessibility as well as tech accessibility, but I didn't really understand quite the website piece to that. Can someone explain that a little more?
Yes, thank you. I'm actually going to defer to Valerie on this one because I know she knows some details about this issue.
Yeah, so we were working with IT in terms of website accessibility, encompassing something that may be needed is having like PDFs be able to be read by text readers. Generally, you have to set up the PDF a certain way in order for it to be read. Also, things just in terms of website accessibility has to do with colors. So I know that our IT team has been working very hard in redesigning the website to meet these requirements, as well as SCS was part of the process in doing an audit on the new website as it was being built.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I didn't anticipate any of that. So that's great. And my final question: so is the 30-year district by district replacement program, is that time frame consistent with other cities comparable to Palo Alto?
So for the sidewalk program, Palo Alto is, I want to say, one of the unique cities that actually does all sidewalk repairs is the responsibility of the city versus some kind of cost sharing program. So I can't really compare the 30-year cycle. It does average out to about $1 million per year to maintain that 30-year cycle. We have deferred work on that because of the budget constraints for fiscal year 2021 and 2022. But again, we'll get started on that in 2023.
If I could just add, Public Works Director Brad Eggleston, we're a little atypical also in the extent of our urban forest and the number of trees we have in Palo Alto. And so a lot of the issues we see where we perhaps have to repair sidewalks more frequently than some other communities might is because of uplift of sidewalks by tree roots that we're addressing.
That makes sense. Ms. Boyd mentioned something about how other cities do cost sharing. What does that model look like?
Do you want to take this one, Brad?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
So in some cities, the city takes no responsibility for repair of sidewalks, and in fact would do inspections and notify residents, property owners if there's an issue with their sidewalk, and direct them to either hire a contractor to follow their specifications and have it repaired by a certain date, or they would do the work themselves and then charge the property owner. And then in some communities, as Ms. Boyd mentioned, there's a cost sharing arrangement where the city may come through from time to time and inspect and do some work, but they would expect some ratio of cost sharing by property owners.
Oh, okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Those are all my. My only other comment. I was glad to see the amount of public outreach that was done. But one thing I'm always concerned about is when public outreach meetings are scheduled for times that most working people can't make. And I noticed that 2/3 of the meetings was scheduled for Mondays at 3 p.m. And that really precludes a large segment of the population that work during the day and can't make those meetings. And I think it's important for us to always be cognizant of that and making sure that we're not just focusing on people who have the luxury of being able to have flexible jobs. And so, yeah, I know one meeting was for 6 p.m., but just a general comment when we're doing these public outreach to, I think, try to be a little more equitable on the times, so we can invite as much of a diverse community as possible. And those are all my comments overall. Thanks so much for all this work, and I'll be supporting the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka, do you have any comments or questions?
Sure. Yeah, thank you also for your guys' work. Really appreciate it. I have to agree with what Councilmember Stone just said, which is I know it's staff's preference to actually have the meeting during work hours, but I think for diversity, for inclusion, I think it's really important that we have these meeting times when the public can attend, especially the working public. So I think that's a really good point, Councilmember Stone. I fully support it, and I hope staff can take that to heart when you guys think about when these meetings are being scheduled, because a lot of people in our city actually have to work, so or go to school, or both. So I think that's something that we should be very mindful of. In regards to the ADA for the website, one thing I was curious about, because it's like it's kind of like a holdover in some ways, but like our website, like our agendas and our staff reports, they're all PDFs, and it's, you know, like for me, I don't actually get any of the paper stuff because I'm trying to save the environment, so I pretty much don't print out anything. It's all on my monitors, but it's actually for ADA reasons, but also just in terms of searchability, right? From Google searches to make it more accessible for people to find stuff. It's actually far better to actually just have it as a regular web page. And I always wondered why, like, you know, because I think it's kind of like why we're very PDF or paper centric, but why not just publish as a web page versus a PDF? It makes them way more accessible, because right now the PDFs, because I listen to a lot of podcasts, and so I use a lot of like I like to listen to staff reports like electronically, right? I mean through audio, but because you guys do it as PDFs, make it actually extra tough. And so I can imagine for people who are disabled who don't have that option of being able to read or listen, or maybe blind, it's actually kind of, you know, first of all, I think it's more work to make it as a PDF, and second of all, it makes it less searchable. And third thing, there's a lot of tools have a hard time with PDFs versus just as a straight web page. I mean, virtually is a straight web page. Almost every single operating system has a built-in text-to-speech thing that's free, right? Versus, you know, some of the ones for PDFs you actually have to pay for, right? So I guess what was staff's motivation to, you know, continue to practice of having PDFs versus just having a straight web page? I never quite understood why we did them as PDFs. I don't know, can someone explain and what's the motivation behind it?
Well, I'll speak to it. Just I can't explain. I'm not experienced in the decision of how the website was set up using PDFs or otherwise. What I can say is a lot of thought went into the structure of the new website that was just released very recently. And at least with respect to ADA compliance that we're discussing this evening, the consultant is coming back now that we have the website is out there to do another audit of the new website.
Well, it's just a thing
so
of,
at least presumably with PDFs, if there were ADA compliance issues, those would be identified for correction.
okay, I guess my main point is just it's like less work for everyone if we just have it as a straight web page. And I mean, it's like if you look at any modern website these days, I mean, we're one of the few places, well, I'm not sure about this, but I know one of the few websites if you look at that still does this PDF thing, right? It's like a holdover from the like a paper world. And so I just wondered, why not just publish web pages like everyone else? It makes it a lot easier for everyone. It makes it also a lot more accessible because all the text-to-speech readers are free, right? Versus PDFs, they're not free, or they're not as good. So it's kind of, I don't know. I mean, I guess I see Megan here. So maybe Megan, do you have some thoughts about this? I just thought we could kind of move to the modern age here, but maybe you could talk more about what's the reason why we should be hold over to the PDF world.
And there's a lot of actually things that go into the website and the design. So I can speak a little bit to your question, but we can also come back with additional details. I know it's getting late, but specific to your comment around use of PDFs and how searchable the website is, we are working through a number of opportunities. A number of other cities actually use Granicus as their searchable site for their meeting packets. We have that option also, and we're actually moving into that direction so that all of our packets will be searchable and all of our staff reports will be searchable. So specific to that question, we are working on a solution around that. So just wanted to mention that specifically. And in terms of our overall ADA score, we actually, our old site was fairly low. It was in the low 70s. And so as part of our move to our new site, our staff is now trained on ADA accessibility for websites specifically. So they use the right links, they use the right type of content to not only make it more searchable, but easier for all users, both those that may be using a way to access the website. So pretty much we're trying to address a lot of different visitors to the website and make it as accessible as possible. We're really excited, actually. The part of this move makes it two things. One, we do have our consultant that will be coming back and doing a new web audit with the new website. So that's in a couple weeks. But as part of the move over, we not only got rid of long, very cumbersome text, but also specific visuals that you actually can't read if you're using a different type of reader. And so we've done quite a bit of effort to get to a point where I'm pretty proud of the work that the staff has done. They are trained on ADA accessibility now, so that's a really great thing moving forward. We have that opportunity. And I did want to mention, we do receive ADA reports on a regular basis, and our ADA score is up in the 80 percentile now.
Well,
so we're excited
that's great.
for that.
Thank you, Megan. I guess my point though is, a lot of people read stuff on their phones these days, and like, because it's a PDF, it's meant for 8.5 by 11 format, like a monitor, right? Or you print it out. But I mean, the reason why people have gone away from PDFs is, and just to straight web pages, is because it becomes more responsive. It's like if you want to read something on your phone, you can read it because it basically reformats it so that it fits on your phone or fits on your computer or whatever device, your Kindle, whatever you happen to be using. But with the PDF, it forces you to have this like 8.5 by 11 format. And so it's very antiquated that we're using this PDF thing. I was meaning to talk about this earlier, but I just never had a chance. But it's something that's always bugged me. It's like, why not just go, and virtually every publishing tool out there has a direct output to a web page versus a PDF file. And I just don't, and if you didn't make it a web page, it's responsive, right? You can fit whatever device you may have, whether it's a full blown, printout, or whether it's a, your wristwatch, right? You could read it on every single device. Right now, it's impossible. You have to have a certain format. So anyways, just
our website is mobile friendly now. So even if you're
PDF
looking,
is not though. The PDF is super hard to read on a phone.
And as a way to help with that specifically to those that we have to use the PDF format, like our council packets, which are a lot and very cumbersome. We do, as part of clicking on that calendar event, we use the event and the agenda inside the actual web page. So we're doing sort of a hybrid in some areas, but I definitely understand your point.
I mean, like for me, like it'd be nice where I could look at the agenda on my phone, right? The staff packet, and it's formatted nicely for a phone or a tablet or my computer or whatever. But right now, because of PDF format, it makes it tough when you're on different devices. And I think something like 3/4 of browsing actually is on your phone, or maybe even higher now. And so it's just not conducive to make it easy for people. So anyways, just something for you guys to think about. And I think also for ADA compliance reasons, it also makes it easier because every single browser has a text-to-speech reader that works well for a web page, but not for PDF. So something for you to think about. Hopefully we could kind of modernize somehow. Second question is I guess maybe this is a question for Molly. So Molly, what's your thoughts on like there's sometimes especially when ADA, there's sometimes like frivolous lawsuits, and how does this plan address some of those concerns?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So the ADA does require the city to have a plan. We did have one before, but it was very dated. It was produced in the 1990s. And so it didn't cover many of our current city facilities. We have acquired and built new facilities and disposed of others. Having a facility listed in this plan and having non-accessible aspects described and addressed in terms of a time frame to move forward on them gives the city some protection against lawsuit for lack of accessibility. So it's very important that this plan, the staff has done the work to, comprehensively look at current city facilities and catalog them and create a plan. It will protect the city to some degree.
Well, I realize that, and I appreciate that. I guess what I was more going towards is at least from your perspective, is there anything else in here that would help protect us from frivolous lawsuits? I guess there's everything that you need kind of in here already. I don't know. That's what I'm asking.
Yes, it's a good plan that will provide the protections that are available in the law.
Okay.
Is that your question?
And there's nothing that you think that we could do more that would make this stronger against frivolous lawsuits?
No.
Okay, that's fine. And then I'm not sure who this, maybe it's for Brad or for Ed, I'm not sure, is if we were to look at the plan and kind of our level of investment, right, where 10 is we're doing everything under the sun to make it happen, right? And 1 is we're doing the minimum, that we have to do this. Where are we on that scale, on a scale from 1 to 10, where 10 being the max and 1 being the minimum? Like in terms of level of investment to actually execute a plan like this?
Well, the Finance Committee is discussing this as we speak concurrently. And again, clearly over the last few years, the city has increased the level of investment. Now, I think you may suggest I'm talking about something different, and I'm not. The capital program and retrofits for accessibility are done hand in hand. And so the debates that the council has been having on whether to proceed with capital projects are specifically and directly impacting our pace of proceeding with the transition plan. So overall, in the last few years, we've been very high in terms of investment. Over the next few years, likely tapering back significantly, and then hopefully increasing after that.
So just out of curiosity, can you, on a scale 1 to 10, what would you think it is right now? Just relatively.
Totally arbitrary. I can't respond to that. I mean, if money were no object, if that were the 10, we're nowhere close to that. Money is an object. Money is a constraint, as it is for all cities.
Okay. So what could be scaled up or down in this plan? What aspect?
Not sure what you're asking, Councilmember.
So to take something from a 1 to a 10 or 10 to a 1, what would you be scaling in this plan?
It would be funding. Increased funding would allow implementation at a quicker pace.
Okay. So what's the current funding at?
Again, it's a mix. It depends on the facility, it depends on the program. And you can see it's decades of work ahead.
So what's the overall funding for this for the proposal on the table right now?
Is there a figure associated with actual implementation?
Well, I can partially speak to it. We've got one capital project that's solely for implementing ADA improvements. And I think I mentioned in introductory comments, kind of on average right now, it's about $500,000 a year. But there's a lot, as city manager mentioned, lots of the accessibility improvements are made in the course of other projects that are happening just through our regular capital rehabilitation. So, if we're out at MSC Building C and we're making electrical improvements and we're applying for a building permit from George in the building department, there's going to be an expectation that we're addressing ADA issues there.
Would an example be, I'm sorry to interrupt, but would an example be, for example, one of the parking lots that is in poor condition, and once you resurface it and fix it, that would make it in compliance with ADA?
Yes, that could be an example. As part of our resurfacing of parking lots, we look at existing striping and signage and make sure it complies to current standards.
Other examples would be the park projects that we've been talking about recently, as far as projects that we're moving forward this fiscal year.
And those are all, they have their own designation and funding, right?
They do. So they're not coming out of that 500,000 annual that I mentioned necessarily. And that kind of speaks to what the city manager said about as the capital program ramps up and down with more funding, the projects that funding is providing are probably also addressing accessibility issues along the way.
So tonight, what we're doing is just having this, the plan for this, but there's no funding attached to it until later during the budget meetings. Is that what I understand, or is that incorrect?
The proposed budget includes this funding, and previous year budgets have as well.
Okay, but tonight we're not doing that. We're just looking at the plan.
That's correct. This is a
Okay.
planning document.
But there's no funding that we're going to look at for this until the budget.
The council funds this annually through the budget process. Isn't that
Okay.
correct, Mr. City Manager?
Correct.
Okay, and there's a chance that some of I noticed, like, we have a lot of our properties on there, but for instance, you guys are looking to close the College Church Library as an example, right? So I guess how does that fit with what we're talking about tonight?
This is a multi-decade plan. And so again, the budget strategies over the next year really wouldn't change the implications of this long-term plan.
So if the building is closed, we would still do the ADA like fixes for it?
I don't think any of us would hope that a closed facility would remain closed for very long.
Okay, so do we prioritize the buildings that are still open, or we do the buildings that are closed first?
That will be a council budget decision.
Okay, well, I would hope we would prioritize the buildings that are still open, right?
That would seem common sense, yes.
Okay, at least that's what I would think we should do. Do you disagree, City Manager? You think we should do the other buildings first?
Seriously, council member,
What was the question?
No, I was just trying to understand what your point was, because I think we should prioritize the buildings that are open still, right?
Sure, of course.
And I was just trying to understand your point.
No, my point was that the council will make decisions on the actual facilities through your budget.
Okay. Okay, because the other thing I wonder about is there's a trend to work from home, and I wonder, like, will some buildings like have more use versus others, right? And so I would imagine like some buildings that have less use, we should probably scale back on, right? And the ones that have more use, don't do more of, right? So you have kind of like the greatest good going on. So that's the other thought. So I think it's like usage, right? So I don't know if that's been baked into the. Can someone bring up that Gantt chart again? Oh man, it's so small. Let me pull up my version of it. Okay.
Can I jump in just for a second to make a point that may be helpful? Because on the slide that had priorities and factors, which were the factors that went into assigning the Gantt chart we were looking at, one of the key things is number and type of programs and services that take place in the facility and frequency of use by the general public. So as city manager said, this is a multi-decade dynamic plan. We fully expect to be making changes. And if changes occur or have already occurred because of a situation we find ourselves in, we would be looking at where we were planning investments and adjusting accordingly.
So how did you decide which boxes are green and which ones are not? I guess green means go. Is that what it means?
I think green represents the 5-year segments of time where we've generally scheduled that we anticipate those improvements to be made at those facilities. Okay. Because these types of improvements tend to be made in conjunction with other capital projects at those facilities, it's not possible for us really to put forward a precise plan with a timeline of just when they would happen.
Okay, so Is there some sort of prioritization of which became green?
Well, yes, it's included in those factors that Ms. Tam described for prioritization.
Okay. I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just want to thank staff for all the work that you've done on this. And again, I just want to remind that this is just the transition plan that we're approving tonight. There's no funding here. And funding is going to be decided by council through the budget studies. So I'd love to get a motion so we can move this forward.
So moved. I'll move the staff recommendation.
Do I have a second? In that case, I'll second. Ms. Kang, would you please call the vote?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Chair Koo,
Yes.
Councilmember Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Yes.
This motion passed unanimously.
Thank you. And thank you for staff for coming tonight and presenting and for all the work. We move on to action item number 3, which is update on community engagement activities, including town halls.
And Morgan Taylor will be making the presentation.
Thank you.
Good evening, committee members. Thank you for having me. I wanted to note there is a staff report attached with this item. Today is just going to be a verbal update, also in just the amount of time and that we're in here tonight to want to get to the committee's questions that you might have about the community engagement opportunities planned for now through the coming fiscal year. So I just wanted to mention and just wanted to push and make sure that I noted the staff report specifically does call out a number of different areas in addition to town halls that we're focused on in the current year as well as in the upcoming fiscal year. And those recommendations and plans that we're finalizing are using best practices and also leveraging some of our past experiences that we feel are some of the ways the community really responded well to different applications. So for example, last year we hosted a series of rail town halls, one in person. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, then we had one virtual. The in-person town hall, we hosted over 200 individuals. There was a Q&A session. We had a comment card that also allowed us an opportunity if a community member had questions that they'd like to see answered after the meeting. We were able to utilize that comment card to help support additional community engagement even after the meeting was concluded. We also were able to, in our virtual town hall, where we hosted over 1,000 community members to talk about rail, we used that comment card again. But it was more a virtual environment, but we utilized some of those best practices as we went through the year. And so you'll see that woven into some of the document and planning that we have for the coming fiscal year. And I just use those two as examples of opportunities where we're able to take some different pieces of what we felt worked well and good feedback we heard from the community and apply it to other aspects of what we're planning. So as part of the staff report, what you'll see is in this current year, we hosted, of course, the virtual rail town hall earlier in the fiscal year, and also hosted just this last Thursday, a budget town hall. The budget town hall had about 97 people registered, 54 participated at the meeting live. After that point, we also had a recording of the town hall, and a number of people have watched that recording to gain a sense for where we are in the budget process. So we do feel felt like the town hall was very dynamic. There was a lot to it. There were some polls, there was a live Q&A, as well as we used the Q&A feature in Zoom. So a lot of opportunity to use a lot of the different tools to engage the community in different ways. This Also, last week, we launched an online survey around the budget. It's also had fairly high engagement rate already, just in the past week of it being live. We have over 528 responses and over 200 pages of actual comments back from the committee itself, or the community itself. So that will be ongoing. It will be open until March 21st at noon. So just wanted to plug those two most recent community engagement opportunities to share that with the committee as well. So in terms of planning for the coming year, I did want to mention a few things. We are hosting and planning on hosting a town hall in the fall. That could be a specific issue-based town hall, which we have done in the past, like our rail town halls, though it could also be a more open format where we take maybe a couple questions for community input. So that's still in the designing phase. So something to look forward to in the fall. We are planning for most of our community engagement efforts, at least through December, to continue to use a online virtual format. And then past that point, you know, as we see the pandemic recovering, potentially make changes after that point to either be a hybrid where we do some virtual, some in person, or just in person. So just wanted to mention that that's kind of woven through the staff report. It is something that will evolve as the pandemic and as recovery evolves. So in terms of other community engagement, what you'll note in the staff report, we're doing and planning a chat with the mayor function. That's going to be twice a year. Very open format, limited staff resources, really just a conversation with the mayor. And that is one area where last year we hosted a virtual chat with the mayor and the city manager. It was a Q&A format. We actually asked for questions in advance and answered those live through YouTube as a TV episode. And so we're using that in a different format, but using a little bit of the same type of elements moving forward in the coming year. So that's the chat with the mayor opportunity twice a year. In addition, we are planning on hosting neighborhood town hall meetings once a month starting in August. We are working on a smaller amount of those meetings, so about 6 to 7 within the city that we're planning. And we'll work through those once a month and also partner with a number of different groups to ensure that that information is out there and we're able to get as many participants and those interested as possible. In addition, I did want to mention that we use quite often our boards, commissions, and committees from a community engagement standpoint. And last year, just wanted to note one area that was very successful was our Human Relations Commission partnership. We hosted a series of race and equity conversations with the police chief to talk about different areas of focus. And I know Councilmember Koo and Councilmember Chinaka were very much involved with those conversations taking place. So as we have issue-based conversations, a lot of those conversations, we are utilizing other community groups as much as possible, like our boards, commissions, and committees. I did want to mention a few other things that are noted in the staff report. One is around our national community survey that typically happens every year. We are coming back to the city council actually next week on the 17th with results from that survey. That is not only a community engagement opportunity, but also the information that is shared through that format, we're then able to take back and think about how services, different services could be provided, how service delivery might change. So that's an ongoing feedback to the city. And this year, one of the new features of that effort was, it was a hybrid survey. So it was both mailed and called surveys, as well as an online format survey. So very different. That'll be more coming to council in the next week on the 17th. In addition, what you'll also see in the staff report is a list of ongoing, upcoming, issue-based community engagement. Lots of different topics that staff and the city manager's office are planning in the coming year around a variety of different community issues that the community is very interested in, from budget, of course, to rail, to sustainability, to furthering race and equity work. So a lot of different areas for the community to participate in, provide feedback, and be a part of the conversation. And with that, I'll stop my comments here and answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Ms. Horgan-Taylor. Any questions? Nope, no questions. Super. The National Community Survey. Oh, I am gonna go to public comments.
I was just gonna say, I see a
Thank
hand
you.
raised.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Kang, would you call?
Yes,
Thank you.
of course. And if anyone from the public would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand on the Zoom app or press star 9. And currently we have one speaker, Cheryl Spencer. Cheryl, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes on the timer for public comment.
I don't see myself being muted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, councillors. I'm Cheryl Spencer, a longtime resident of Palo Alto and a member of the Cities for CEDAW Coalition, the Palo Alto branch of this nationwide coalition. I see in the list of issue-specific community engagements that are planned, the Summit on Women and Girls is listed to happen on Saturday, June the 12th. We are happy to see this summit has been scheduled and suppose its planning has been ongoing. I suppose it will be a virtual meeting and free to attend. I'd like to know how this summit will be advertised and urge you to do it widely and not just depend on the city's website, so that there will be a good turnout from a diverse set of Palo Alto residents and people who work in Palo Alto. Especially we want to get young people to attend this summit. I hope this summit will lead to a city ordinance based on the CEDAW Convention, which was our coalition's original request to the City Council. I'm also pleased to see there will be a study session on the National Community Survey on the 17th of May. I hope that Polco's analysis will have some comparisons of survey answers by women and men, as I have suggested in my past comments to your committee, that this national survey is an excellent opportunity to see if women and men are perceiving your services differently, if there is indeed any discrimination going on. So I do hope that you have asked Polco to do some of that analysis. This is how the women answered, this is how the men answered. And I took the survey, so I know I was asked if I was a man or a woman. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Chair Koo, we have no other speakers.
Thank you. Thanks to the public for their comments. And I see a hand by Councilmember Stone.
Thank you, Chair Koo. I just have one question and then just a couple comments. Is staff examining like hybrid models for the future where we can have in-person community meetings that are also allowing the community to be able to participate virtually?
At this point, and perhaps Megan, feel free to jump in, but I think at this point, our consideration of hybrid models has really started and focused on the city council itself. And that would really set expectations as to how it might work and the logistics involved.
Yeah, right now for our community engagement planning, at least through December, we're planning fully virtual, but for sure, as part of looking at the future, the potential to do hybrid is definitely an opportunity to continue to look at.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great, because I think Councilmember Tanaka pointed out earlier just how by himself talking to constituents and myself as well, having a similar experience with people really being able to enjoy the the flexibility of
Mhm.
being able to join in these city events and meetings from the comfort of their homes. And so I think that's important that we continue that as much as possible. Overall, I'm really excited about this plan. I appreciate all of your efforts to really kind of re-engage the city. I think it's going to be so critical coming out of this pandemic to be able to provide people an opportunity to be able to reconnect and re-meet their neighbors and just feel some sort of sense of normalcy and community again, and really just a celebration of being able to have come out of this terrible couple of years that we've been in. So really excited to see that we have a lot of things scheduled for that. I'm happy for the town hall meetings to come back. I remember a few years ago when I was the chair of the Midtown Residents Association, Ed, and I believe it was Councilmember Philseth was the mayor at the time. Well, we hosted a town hall meeting for Midtown residents, and it was great. We had a decent turnout, and people really enjoyed the opportunity to be able to meet the city manager and the mayor. And so I've been disappointed to see that hasn't really been happening the last few years, but I'm thrilled to have, I think that for that to come back. I think that's a really important opportunity. And Ed was just a star in that meeting. He even sang karaoke if you asked him to. So, well, unfortunately, no, but Ed, I think you should consider that for future meetings. I think that would be entertaining. One suggestion that I would really like to see, because I mean, so many of these meetings and these town hall events are focused on just focus on Palo Alto in general. I'd like to see us have some things targeted for the city's youth. Where I think we're fortunate that we've had some really good participation lately at city council meetings on issues that have really attracted some of the youth voice and concern. But generally speaking, the youth are not going to be, I think, very comfortable joining these type of town hall meetings or chats with the mayor, and especially when we get to the point of being in person. So I think it would be really nice to be able to have some town hall meetings, or maybe a special mayor meeting that can be really just focused on, really targeted for the city's youth. It could be, of course, a condensed version or whatnot, but I think that would show not only that the community cares about the youth voice, but we're really willing to set time aside with people in leadership positions to listen to the voices and to just provide them that opportunity to share in a setting that is kind of safe and geared towards them. So that's really only my only recommendation of what I'd like to see. Overall, the plan looks really good. So thank you.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, I have to agree. I definitely appreciate your work on this. I think that one thing that the city manager has told me, I just wanted to see, you didn't really talk about it, so I wanted to understand where you guys are on this, especially given some of the utility outages that we've been having. But I think there was an intent to try to roll out a Net Promoter Score type of survey system early June. And I don't know if you guys are involved in this or it's some other department, but I'd love for you guys to be able to talk a little bit where you guys are on this.
Sure. Ed, would you like to start?
Well, I would just note that it's somewhat separate from the topic that's before the council this evening on community engagement. That said, we are piloting, as we've discussed, what we're calling a service feedback tool. And it will start with planning, development, services, and I believe utilities, if I'm recalling correctly. Megan could confirm.
Community services.
Gotcha.
I think, because you mentioned a bit about some of the surveys that you're doing, but I think that a lot of research has shown that going to shorter, more frequent surveys, especially at the time of service delivery, is far, far more effective than once a year type of super long surveys. So I think going more in that direction actually is a good thing, because it's hard for people to remember their experience of the city, because most people don't hang out at city council meetings. Their experiences, calling up utilities and saying, "Hey, my power's out," or going to a development center or something like that. So that's what their experience is. And so understanding how well they're serviced at the time they got the service is actually really important. and so automatically sending that stuff out. So I'd rather see more of our efforts go in that direction versus once a year survey with a small number of people, which are, it's also a very expensive survey. Now, I know the drawback, which is it's hard to compare against other cities because you have that standardized survey, but the issue is that there's a long lag time from when people get that survey, and most people probably wouldn't get that survey, the mega survey from the city. And if you use Net Promoter type score, you get they're actually fairly established standards in terms of what the Net Promoter score is. It's actually a standard in itself. So that allows us to kind of compare our quality of customer service for different departments and for different people, perhaps, and allows us to hold more people accountable and to deliver better service to our constituents.
I definitely appreciate that comment. I did want to mention, in addition to this new platform that we're working on and will pilot in June, as noted, we do have an online platform called Palo Alto Town Hall. And that is where our budget survey is currently being hosted. We use that frequently through the year. At least last year, we used it about 5, maybe 6 different times through the year. We are planning on using that a lot more as well. And so you'll see our ability to, of course, use our national community survey, once a year, but have these other ways of reaching out and having two-way feedback. So just wanted to mention that as another opportunity.
Okay, great. Yeah, I guess kind of what I'm saying though is, there's like the Palo Alto 500, people who are super engaged. They call in every council meeting, every policy services committee meeting, and we hear from them a lot, right? Those people are super engaged. But the people that aren't as engaged, and there's the people that, they're not, reading our newspaper blogs or local papers, but these are people who think my trash cover is missing or something like that. It's like these are the people who just use our services, and I think that's the voice that we don't hear from much, right? That there's a lot of people like that who aren't that engaged with the city, right? But they live in the city and they experience the city through the services that they use, and so having mechanisms where people don't have to be so proactive, where it kind of comes to them. It's kind of like, a lot of times you go to stores and you buy something, or you buy something on Amazon, you almost ask for a review, right? I can't imagine a time when I bought something on Amazon, I wasn't asked for a review, and it's kind of automatic because I think probably 90% or more higher, maybe 95% of the people in our city will never talk to a city council meeting or council member, or go to a city council member, or go to a city council meeting, or that, for that matter, policy and services meeting. And so getting for someone to go to our budget, they have to be super engaged in our city, right? That's a highly engaged constituent. But most people in our city are not like that. Most people in our city are busy, working, kids in school, stuff like that, and they only interact with the city when something goes wrong, right? And so understanding that getting that touch point, I think, is really important, because I think that's the majority of people, are people who are busy and occasional city watchers, right? They're not going to go diving into our budget. It'd be great if they did, but I think most people are just not going to do that. So, but anyways, I appreciate what you're trying to do. And if you think of other ways of capturing people when they're interacting with the city, and I'm talking about the people who are not actively engaged, people who aren't going to our YouTube channel, right? I think that's also really important to hear those voices.
And Councilmember Tanaka, I think that's why there's this community engagement update here to show all the different avenues that the city is going to be putting forward in order to actually get there in front of the constituents. Yeah. And if there's nothing more, I just want to say thank you very much for this update. It's just an update, so there's no need for a vote of any sort. I am looking forward to the neighborhood town hall meetings. That's another way to go back and connect with all of the residents in each of the neighborhoods, and for each of the council members to get some experience and listening time, and finding out more by asking questions, on both sides. One question about the National Community Survey. I know usually we use that information at the beginning of the year for our priority setting. So will that be the intention for next year, or is it just to kind of keep track and have the same timeline?
I'll take a crack at this, and then Mr. Shikata or Ms. Horgan Taylor can fill in. As part of the budget proposal, we actually are proposing every other year for the citizen survey. So that is something that is of consideration right now to the City Council. Additionally, the time frame of it, we are looking to, when we do the survey, align it with the timing that was previously used on the survey. We had a change in the contract, and so that was part of why the survey this year is coming a little bit later. So I think the timing will align better for the priorities that we need it for going forward.
Very good.
And last year we did use our other online forum to help survey the community around council priority setting. So we'll definitely use that again in the coming year.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If there's no other comments or questions, then we'll close this agenda item. And I just want to say thank you to Ms. Horgan Taylor for coming forward today to bring us this update.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So lastly, just future meetings and agenda. Ms. Gaines, could you update us, please?
Yes, very quickly. The items for June are the review of the tree ordinance discussion. The second is an audit report. And then we have two other items. So Chair Koo, you and I can discuss offline how to manage this, but the procedures and protocols for the City Council, that discussion was continued from the March meeting. We were not able to get to that one. And so that's on the June agenda, as well as the quarterly update on the race and equity work. So those are the 4 items currently listed for the month of June, and no meeting in July.
Okay. Thank you. I'll get together with you offline. And with that, if there's nothing else, anything? No. Okay, then the meeting is adjourned. Ms. Kang, I just want to say thank you, and thanks to Ms. Stump and Ms. Gaines and Mr. Shikata.
Good night, all.
Good night.